Hunting Charm, Chapter 11, A Raptor's Claw. She appeared the same way each time, framed against a vermilion sky. In his dreams, the angel smiled and held his deformed right hand in hers, as if the horrible claw, something even he could not look at without disgust, meant nothing to her. In his dream, in her presence, he felt whole again, as if a normal life might be possible. At age 11, Henry Walker fled from Rosewood, a plantation in northern Georgia. His father, Henry Sr., forced him to come along despite the objections of his mother, despite his own tearful refusals. Carrying only a few supplies, they left on a moonless night in late October and traveled north for a part of Pennsylvania that some still call Dutch country. They would never reach their destination. Just south of the Mason-Dixon line, a band of slave catchers caught up and gave chase through the dogwood, elm, and maple of northern Maryland. The hunters, a group of 9 men accompanied by a pack of over 20 dogs, had years of experience tracking slaves. The lawless band of self-proclaimed champions of law and order didn't hesitate when they saw Henry's group. They began whistling and firing their guns at the sky. The dogs, accustomed to their task, began barking and braying. In response, the slaves scattered and formed smaller groups of 2 or 3, losing, to panic, any advantage they might have had in unity. Henry and his father dodged into a thicket of oak brush, an action that stalled the men on horseback, but didn't stop the dogs. When Henry and his father cleared the brush, a trio of bloodhounds closed quickly. Henry's father, a powerful man with muscles hardened by years of labor, snatched the first hound and, swinging it by a hind leg, broke the unfortunate canine against a tree. The remaining bloodhounds stopped and stood barking and whining alongside their shattered cousin. Henry and his son ran on. All around they heard the cries of their fellow slaves, the shouting of the slave hunters, and the bleat of a bugler blowing an out-of-tune call to arms. Henry's father pressed deeper into the brush, dragging his son until the sounds faded to distant echoes. At one point, Henry fell and told his father he couldn't continue, so Henry Sr. lifted his son and carried him. They pushed deep into the forest, then waded into a trickling river, hoping the water would mask their trail. Henry's father, with Henry on his shoulders, pushed through the knee-high current for the next 2 hours until they heard nothing but the chittering birds, the rustling wind through the red oaks. When they stopped, they had not stepped foot on dry land for 5 miles. Henry Walker Sr. must have felt they were safe. Cactus Branch had only vague memories of what happened next. The hour had grown late, well after midnight. They slept in a clearing surrounded by shagbark hickory and tulip poplar. When they awoke, it was to the sound of dogs crashing through the undergrowth. Henry recalled how a single mounted slave catcher appeared and with a sweeping motion tossed a net over his father. For a moment, it seemed the slaver had overplayed his hand as Henry's father planted his feet and unseated the rider. The white men let out a call as Henry's father pummeled him. Then a pistol appeared in the slaver's hand. A single shot resounded through the woods, and his father fell, struck in the right hip just below the belt line. A moment later, 2 more riders appeared, and their flight ended. Despite the bullet wound, his father survived and for 3 days willed himself to walk. On the fourth day he fell and couldn't stand. The slave riders left him to die on the roadside. Henry Sr. told his son goodbye, but Henry, determined not to leave his father's side, tussled with one of the slave catchers. In the fray, the white man wrenched Henry's arm and separated his right shoulder. As he lay writhing in pain, the slave catcher, angered by Henry's insolence, stomped his right forearm, shattering both the ulna and radius. Rather than treat the injury, the rider tied Henry's hands behind his back, an action that removed any chance the subluxated shoulder might move naturally back into its socket. Then the man stuffed Henry into a wooden box in the supply wagon and left him there for the remaining 4 days of their journey back to Rosewood. Perhaps mercifully, inside the box, the agony of Henry's shoulder and the concurrent shock rendered him unconscious most of the time. The vascular and nerve damage caused by the broken forearm and separated shoulder were irreversible. In the end, of the 18 slaves that left Rosewood 2 weeks earlier, only 10 survived. When Rosewood's owner saw Henry, he told the slave catchers to dispose of the boy. He was too damaged to do any work. So as the slave catchers left the plantation, they threw Henry into a ditch filled with tall cane a half-mile or so up the road. Only the resiliency of youth and sheer luck saved him. The roadside gully contained a small bit of rainwater, otherwise Henry might have died of dehydration. He might have died anyway, but after 2 days, an old woman everyone called Amma came along. She was on her way to town to purchase a few items for the Rosewood kitchen. At first, she judged Henry to be dead, as other passers-by had done, but Amma decided to take a closer look, thinking she might identify the deceased child. Making her way carefully, she stepped down into the cane and peered at Henry, who lay face down in the mud. When she placed a hand on Henry's shoulder, he moaned. "Oh, you poor child," she said. Despite her age, the sturdy woman hoisted Henry out of the ditch and carried him the half-mile back to Rosewood. After placing the boy into her own bed, Amma alerted one of the other women and began the walk back into town. She hurried, knowing her owner would be angry if she failed to serve dinner at the usual time. When Amma arrived back home late that evening, Jana, her granddaughter, had removed Henry's badly soiled clothing. She had cleaned him up some and had fed him a bit of oatmeal. Henry lay in Amma's bed for nearly a month, sleeping there beside her at night, slowly regaining strength. His damaged shoulder would never heal properly, and over time, the muscles in his broken right forearm atrophied, as did his right hand into a sort of raptor's claw. As he became more active, Amma realized she could no longer keep him hidden and informed her owner that Henry lived. Despite his injuries, Henry's strength returned. He soon proved useful, working at several tasks using only his left arm. He regained strength in his right arm as well, and though the range of motion was limited, he found ways to compensate. For the next 6 years, Henry worked year-round picking cotton, chopping firewood, hoeing weeds, and baling hay. Despite his physical recovery, it became clear that Henry's ordeal had changed him. He rarely spoke, and if he met one's gaze, which he almost never did, his eyes had the fearful look of a trapped animal. At the same time, he grew tall like his father. Even though some of the other slaves encouraged him to be more forthcoming, he remained silent and enigmatic. Gradually, rumors began to circulate that a dark spirit possessed the young man. Some even suggested he wielded a evil juju. So friendless and increasingly shunned by his fellow slaves, Henry's thoughts turned inward. It was during those years that the dreams started. Always the same, the blonde woman floating above him, the blue skies beyond, the angel holding his damaged hand. When he turned 18, the owner of Rosewood, aware that the other slaves feared Henry, sold him to a passing trader for $10, an old wood-burning stove, and a half cord of oak firewood. 2 weeks later, his new owner traded Henry for a saddled pony and a stout draft mule to Jake McQueen. Chapter 12, Cactus Branch and His Angel. At the slave auction, when Jake first examined Henry, he noted the young man's malformed shoulder and knitted brow. He feared Henry's injury might prevent him from doing much work, but he saw something else, a ghost from his past. Jake didn't know at the time that his investment would pay off handsomely. He only saw an inexplicable connection to his own past. Jake's mother had died when he was 14. Her memory floated in the Creek chief's mind like an owl silhouetted upon a full moon. The Muskogee had called her Crazed Tongue, but Jake's father told his son that in her youth his mother had been named Cactus Blossom. Jake never knew Cactus Blossom, only Crazed Tongue. As he grew older, he learned that his once beautiful mother had angered the snake god, who sent his servant to her lodge one night to bite her on the shoulder. The venom entered Cactus Blossom's right arm and the right side of her head. As a result, Cactus Blossom's mouth and right eye sagged, and her voice, once musical and lively, became a hoarse rasp. Her right arm, though not totally immobilized by the bite, shriveled over time. That was when the tribe began calling her Crazed Tongue. Jake's memories of Crazed Tongue were both vague and haunting. There had been moments when his mother, eyes downcast, held him tenderly and whispered softly of her love. Other times she behaved in unpredictable ways, menacing him with her claw-like right hand or ranting at a perceived slight or a failure to meet her eccentric standards. When Jake traded for Henry, he began calling his new slave Cactus Branch. Most believed the name reflected Henry's appearance. The man was crooked like the branch of a cholla cactus. In Jake's mind, however, and in the mind of a few others that knew the story of Crazed Tongue, Cactus Branch, with its resemblance to the name Cactus Blossom, seemed the perfect label for the odd reincarnation of Jake's long-deceased mother. Life among the Muskogee proved difficult for Henry. Like Cynthia Johnson, he found the tribal customs confusing. None of the Creek people or even the other slaves spoke to him. Most of them knew little or no English. They were unnerved by the odd-looking man who towered over everyone, but Henry performed his chores well, ate what he was given, and at first slept outside with the dogs. So for a time little was said about the newest member of Jake's household. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before some of the Creek people began gossiping about Henry. Like the slaves had done at Rosewood, whispers suggested Henry might bring misfortune upon the tribe. Jake assured them that Henry appeared troubled because of his suffering. Even so, there was talk of Henry's banishment. Fortunately, an elderly healer, curious about Henry, examined his injuries, and even gave him tribal remedies to ease the pain that often troubled him. The medicine woman also cut snippets of Henry's hair and claimed they added potency to her concoctions. Gradually, talk of banishment dwindled. Even so, the rumors assured that Henry remained friendless. In his world of harsh servitude, superstition, and isolation, Henry's dreams of an angel grew more nuanced and persistent. Henry's angel, as already described, first appeared hovering before him with long blonde hair. As the dreams grew more detailed, his blonde-haired angel took Henry to an enormous house with winding hallways, grand rooms, and tables laden with rich meats, fruits, and sweet cakes. Within the grand house, Henry's shoulder and shriveled arm were whole. The women and men there spoke to him in a respectful manner, listened to his thoughts, and comforted him. Henry would awaken from such dreams, imagining he lived as others did, as a part of a community. In a sense, the dreams made life tolerable. They gave Henry faith that something might exist beyond his world of suffering. The dreams even gave him a sense of empathy for others. Consequently, Henry strove to better himself and began devising ways to compensate for his handicap. He learned to handle a plow by looping the reins around his neck and down to his one good hand. Then, by standing between the wooden handles of the implement, he could grasp the plow's right handle with his partially shriveled hand and cut deep and straight furrows. Henry learned other skills. Naturally right-handed, he learned to grasp nails with his damaged hand and the hammer with his left. He fashioned a set of clamps and a table with guideposts and taught himself woodworking. Later, out of necessity, he even discovered ways of cold-working metal and crafted hinges, metal fittings, and even crude tools. Jake McQueen, ever aware of Cactus Branch, first realized he had made a significant investment when Henry built a door and windows for Jake's adobe home. Henry's window sealed seamlessly and opened easily to allow a breeze inside during the humid summer. Henry's door, likewise, fit tightly and hung perfectly on hinges Henry cut from an old barrel ring. Jake decided Henry needed better tools and purchased a drill, a pair of cross-cut saws for felling trees, and portable milling bars to create boards. In addition, Jake, over time, gave Henry forged steel chisels, block planes, and coping and mitering saws. In each case, if Henry didn't already know how to use a tool, he worked diligently to learn. Over time, Henry's expertise became widely known. When an aunt or uncle, cousin, or nephew started a new construction project, Jake sent Henry to do the work. As demand for Henry's time grew, the creek leader gave him mules to carry his tools. Before long, the carpenter with the curved shoulder and damaged arm earned the unspoken respect of his community. Everyone knew of the quality of Henry's work. Unfortunately, respect did not translate to friendship or even acceptance. People simply didn't know how to approach Henry. Consequently, the strange carpenter with bulging muscles and knitted brow remained alone, living in a world where he rarely spoke or was spoken to. As already stated, when Henry saw Cecil Johnson's loaded wagons pass on that late April afternoon, his eyes fell immediately on Doreen Tarwater. He had never spoken to anyone about his dreams. Truth be told, Henry regarded the dreams, for the most part, as a manifestation of his own suffering. After all, unless one counts profound loneliness as a mental illness, Henry wasn't crazy. Nevertheless, on that afternoon when he saw Doreen Tarwater in the distance, Henry thought about his dreams. He left his porch and followed Cecil's wagon, careful to remain unseen. Familiar with the area, Henry found a hiding spot and watched as Doreen stepped down from the wagon. His heart racing, he continued to watch as she gathered her things and stood to one side as Cecil greeted Cynthia and the children. Henry might have turned away to return home after Doreen disappeared inside the barn, but curiosity held him there. He waited for nearly an hour until Cecil's daughter toddled across the yard to the barn carrying a plate. For the briefest moment, the woman appeared, then was gone again. He considered leaving then, but another idea had already occurred to him. As darkness fell, he crept near the barn. He noted the poorly fitted windows and felt a twinge of annoyance. He had tried to help with construction of the barn, but Johnson had insisted upon doing the work himself. On this occasion, the loose-fitting windows served Henry's purpose. A small gap in a corner of the frame allowed him to peek inside, where Doreen sat, illuminated by a flickering lamp. She had removed her dress and wore only a thin cotton blouse and petticoat. The sight of the young woman aroused Henry. Before slipping a hand inside his trousers, as he sometimes did, to relieve his sexual desire, however, he mentally scolded himself. If this was his angel, God hadn't sent her for his gratification. Henry realized that God probably hadn't sent Doreen. He told himself she had undoubtedly arrived via some whim of circumstance. Still, the woman's similarity to the woman in his dreams seemed like too much to ignore. He had to know what had brought the woman there, though he had no idea how he might answer the question. With that thought in mind, he turned from the window. As he did so, however, he stumbled on a clump of grass. To avoid falling, he threw himself against the laid stone wall of Cecil's barn, sending bits of loose rocks scattering to the ground. Feeling certain Doreen must have heard something inside, he hustled away. He had only gone a few feet when he heard Doreen's voice. "Who is that there? Is that Mr. Johnson?" Doreen had stepped outside. "Mr. Johnson, is that you?" For a long moment, Cactus Branch fought the urge to run, but something held him there. Was this a chance, perhaps, to answer his question? So he spoke, his voice quavering. "No, ma'am, this ain't Mr. Johnson." "Is it Mr. Sugars?" "No, ain't Mr. Sugars neither. I am Henry. The name is Henry. Folks round here calls me Cactus Branch." Doreen squinted, unable to see because the new arrival, Cactus Branch, stood in the shadows of a stand of red oaks. The man's voice didn't sound unkind. "I'm still a little hungry and thought maybe Mrs. Johnson might bring a bit more dinner," she said. "Do you live here?" "No, ma'am, I live just up the road. I see you come in and Henry paused, realizing he couldn't tell the woman he had been spying upon her. I reckon they'd give you more to eat if you was to ask." Then, almost as if he couldn't help himself, Henry asked the question foremost on his mind. Are you an angel?" "I'm sorry, what was that? Did you ask if I'm an angel?" "Yes, I know the question. Thing is, I done read on angels in the Bible. You ain't no angel, is you?" Doreen felt herself blushing and, despite the odd circumstances, felt flattered. "I've been called an angel before," she said, then added, "But I don't know if I feel it's appropriate for a colored boy to use such familiar language." Doreen's response left Henry feeling weak in the knees. Moments earlier, doubts about the woman had flooded his mind. Now she had spoken directly to him and seemed unafraid. It didn't occur to Henry that Doreen couldn't see him in the darkness. His only thought was that the woman had told him that she was, in fact, an angel. Doreen, on the other hand, felt a sensation of her own. After several days in a boring wagon and months of house arrest, she had grown increasingly restless. Before the botched abortion, she had been accustomed to regular sexual encounters with Billy Dixon or one of the other locals. The day she left town, Dixon had refused her advances, saying it was too early in the day. In short, she had over 6 months of pent-up sexual desire stewing inside, and it didn't matter much who the stranger was standing before her, and he had called her his angel. "Why don't you come a little closer? I can hardly see you," she said. In a daze, Henry stumbled forward, barely able to keep his footing. From the moment he had first looked through the poorly fitted window frame at Doreen in her undershirt, his John Henry had been throbbing. He sensed her mood, and despite alarm bells ringing in his brain, he could not stop himself. Doreen squinted again, blinking to see more clearly. Unfortunately, the overcast night, without even a flickering candle to illuminate things, rendered the approaching man nearly invisible. She could vaguely see what appeared to be a sack or something on his right shoulder, and wondered why he didn't place the bag on the ground. As the man drew closer, she felt her sexual excitement rise. She placed her hand against the front of Henry's trousers. "Oh, my," she said. The encounter lasted only a few seconds, but in those fleeting moments, Henry's conception of the world changed. When Doreen Tarwater unbuttoned his jeans and took him in her hand, her touch affected the former slave so intensely that his John Henry instantly discharged a flood of viscous fluid. For a normal person in normal circumstances, the event might have been fodder for a crude bit of humor. For Henry, though, the release provoked a combination of panic and what might be called enlightenment. Without thought or hesitation, still moaning from his violent orgasm, Cactus Branch turned and ran. As for Doreen, she had experienced men who came quickly, but nothing like this. She hadn't even had time to get her bloomers down before the man began ejaculating. Then an instant later he sprang away, moaning like a wounded animal. "Where are you going?" she called out. "There ain't no need to run." Then her words caught in her throat. The moon that had been hiding behind a bank of clouds suddenly illuminated the prairie. 30 yards away, she saw Henry Walker clearly for the first time. Hunting Charm, Chapter 13, Hillside Skirmish. "We're not staying another 2 days, Brant shouted. 3 days is long enough. I hunted jackrabbits and poked at tadpoles. We have enough firewood to last a month. Hell, I even read a part of a damn book. That Parker feller ain't coming. If he's not here in 2 more days, we'll leave." Matt didn't bother to look up from the letter he was writing. "You mean if he ain't here in 2 days, you'll leave? Because I'm packing up tomorrow morning." You'd leave your best friend out here to face savage Comanches by himself? Damn right. Brent had no plans to leave Matt alone in Comanche territory, but given his nervousness about the situation, he felt more than willing to claim otherwise. What makes you think Quanah is gonna come out here just to talk with you anyways? Well, for one thing, Sam and that other fellow said they would bring him this way. Plus, I told Sam I'd give Quanah a pistol for his trouble. What? You can't give a Comanche a pistol just like that. It ain't lawful, for one thing, and he's just as likely to shoot you with it as for another. Matt sighed and placed his quill back into its box. Let's wait one more day, okay? Brent started to reply, but from the corner of his eye he detected movement on a nearby hillside. You see that? What? There, on the side of the hill. Matt saw it as well now. A line of Comanche warriors winding along a narrow game trail. Come on, get in the hole. Brent had constructed a small fortification, a hole dug into a steep embankment. Around the hole he had placed rudimentary battlements of logs and sand. Matt chided his trail partner about the preparations, but at the sight of the approaching riders, he moved without hesitation into the hole. Get that kettle, too, Brent said, and then the 2 water bags. We might enjoy a little coffee if we're down there a while. Brent's makeshift fort afforded easy access to water and protection for the horses, staked in clear view 20 yards away in a grassy clearing. If worse came to worse, they could scramble down the bank and ride for safety. That's probably Quanah, Matt said. Yeah, and maybe it ain't, Brent replied. Even if it is Quanah, didn't you say he took 2 of those Baylor boys' mule? I'll shoot it out before I give up our mounts. The 2 men settled in, rifles and pistols ready. When the native riders entered their camp, however, Brent knew that Quanah Parker wasn't in the group. These weren't Comanche warriors, but rather boys, most of them no older than 10 or 12. What do you want? Brent said. The riders stopped, uncertain at first as to the location of the speaker. A moment later, however, they identified Matt and Brent's position and reined their mounts. Brent cocked his rifle and fired a single shot into the sky. Hold up right there. He turned to Matt. Do you think any of them speak English? Doubtful, Matt said. Were you the boys sent here by Quanah Parker? The leader of the group, a boy of perhaps 15, replied in halting English. Quanah sent us to get you. You come to his camp. Oh, hell no, Brent whispered to Matt. Why would Quanah send boys? Something ain't right. Brent surveyed the surrounding hillside, examining rocks and trees for telltale signs of other possible marauders. Well, why would Quanah send a bunch of children? He repeated, this time loud enough for the boys to hear. We are not children. Come out now, or we kill you, white man. That's what I thought, Brent said. These boys are on their own. 2 of the riders edged nearer, while others circled down the ravine in the direction of the horses. Back away from our ponies, or I'm going to put a bullet in you, Brent warned. The leader of the group looked defiant for a moment, but Brent sensed his uncertainty. A moment later, the teen whistled and gestured for the others to return. If Quanah wants to kill you, he will do it himself, the leader said. Quanah gives his word. You will not be killed. Shit, Brent hissed. These boys are out running around on their own. Maybe we should Matt seemed to be considering the invitation. I mean, if they know where Quanah is camped, we're not going to ride with a pack of teenage coyotes. You know as well as I do that these Comanche tend to be independent-minded. There ain't no telling what this bunch has planned. Hang on, I have an idea. Matt cleared his throat, speaking loudly. Did you boys talk to Sam Running Toes or Nakona? The lead rider paused for a long moment, then replied, Quanah say he wants the pistol you promised. The two old warriors gave their wives the things for sewing. So you boys know about the pistol we promised Quanah? Did Quanah's wife like the sewing kit? You know, he wouldn't be happy if you were to ambush us. Quanah sent us to bring you to him, the lead rider repeated. You can lead us to Quanah's camp, Matt asked. It's just over the hill, the older boy gestured. No, Matt, this is a bad idea, Brant said. Maybe he figures we won't be as nervous with these boys. I realize the situation isn't ideal, but if there's a chance Quanah sent them, just hang on a minute. Brant stood, rifle still, on the lead rider. We don't feel comfortable with the situation. There are 8 of you and only 2 of us. Give us directions to Quanah's camp. The lead rider paused for a moment, then said, Quanah say you ride with us or don't come. Brant nodded. It was the response he had expected. We figure Quanah wants things fair and square. Why don't 2 or 3 of you ride with us and the rest can ride on ahead? The lead rider paused for a long moment, then waved most of the group back up the hill, leaving only the 3 oldest boys. Are you satisfied now, white man? The young warrior sneered at Brant. I reckon so. Brant still felt uncomfortable, but after 3 days he was ready to move on. Though it seemed unlikely Quanah had sent the boys, it took only a minute to saddle their ponies. They would leave their gear but take the mules. Hopefully the younger Comanche boys wouldn't circle back and steal their things. If worse came to worse, the tents, food, and cooking utensils could be replaced. We're ready, Brant said. They wound their way up the gently sloping trail. Brant scanned ahead and saw that if the boys were planning an ambush, it would come at the ridgeline, where the trail disappeared behind a rocky escarpment. Then Matt tapped Brant on the arm. He pointed to something hanging from the arm of the lead rider. It was a small leather bag branded Abilene Mercantile. The bag the boy had told them 10 minutes earlier had been given to Quanah's wife. This might get to be a warm day, Brant said. I think you're right. Matt nodded at a stand of trees 100 yards to their right. A bit of shade, he said. Matt and Brant spurred their ponies as a pack of whooping preteens appeared at the top of the trail. Matt and Brant's prescient response to their attack confused the immature warriors, and for a moment the bunch sat in a state of confusion, watching Matt and Brant ride away. They had covered half the distance to the trees before the first bullet whizzed by. Brant, gripping the sides of his quarter horse with his legs, gave his mule a slap on the rump, then turned in his saddle. Holding the reins in one hand and his Winchester repeater in the other, he fired off several rounds. He didn't shoot to kill, but rather to slow the now charging pack. You think this bunch plans on killing us? Matt struggled with his mule and hat. They ain't shooting fake bullets. What is our plan? Matt, now juggling his hat, almost fell off his horse. When we get to the trees, tie off the mules and pony. If I can knock down a couple of their horses, that would be enough to take the wind out of their sails." Matt's speech had suddenly become incomprehensible. Brant turned and saw that Matt now had his hat in his mouth. "What?" Brent spurred in Matt's direction, reached over and pulled the hat from Matt's mouth and flung it into the air. "That was my best hat. Hell, that was my only hat. My head will get all burnt up without it. If you're dead, you won't need it." "Fair enough." At the tree line, Brant leapt from his horse, took a knee, sighted, exhaled, and gave the trigger a squeeze. 20 yards away, the mount of the nearest rider buckled, sending its rider flying. Brant fired again, and the second horse crumpled. The attack ended abruptly, the boys scattering for cover. "What do you figure they want?" Matt asked. "Ain't no telling," Brant said. "Boys that age can be unpredictable. I sure as hell was." "Are they gone?" "What do you think? Get the mules and horses ready to go." Brant scanned their surroundings. He assumed the boys would regroup for a second ambush. "My mount took a bullet in the hindquarters," Matt said. "He's bleeding some, but I don't think it's too bad." Brent recalled the last time they had traveled in Comanche territory. Both of their horses had died, though one of the mounts had carried them to Fort Bascom despite a split hoof and a bullet in its side. The thought of losing a mount made him uneasy. "Can he run a bit?" Matt asked. "Looks like it's just a graze," Matt said. Brent could see the bullet hadn't penetrated. With a little Pratt's ointment, the horse would be fine. "Okay, we're going to ride back for that hole by the creek. We'll go wide of that oak brush over yonder. Just follow me." They remounted and started down the hillside. For a moment it seemed like things would be fine. As they reached the bottom of the hill, however, a boy appeared with a sawed-off rifle and fired. Brent felt the sharp sting of a bullet hitting his right leg. He instinctively pulled his pistol and fired. The boy, perhaps 12, tried to raise his rifle, but only managed a final skyward shot as he fell. Once more they spurred, but none of the other boys appeared. A minute later they were back in camp, the horses and mules secured alongside their fort. "You're shot?" Matt asked as Brent collapsed against a log. "Yes, I just hope my leg stopped the bullet." "Your horse is shot?" "I don't know if my dang horse is shot." "Yeah, but your horse ain't shot, is it?" "Did you hear the part where I mentioned I was shot?" "I heard. I just don't like the idea of having to ride double." Matt pulled his shotgun to his shoulder and fired around. "What are you shooting at?" Brent glanced around nervously. "Warning shot." "Well, who are you warning?" "You're getting difficult to converse with, Hunter. I lost my hat." "You're the one who insisted we follow them boys. I wouldn't be so hard to converse with if you wouldn't insist on leading us into these situations. I see no reason why we need to talk with this Parker fella." "I explained it 50 times. We're following the path of those fat twins in Abilene." "I'd say I appreciate your persistence, but I'm shot." "Let me look at it." Brent eased back against the side of his makeshift fortress, watching passively as Matt dug through his bag. He felt deeply annoyed with the entire situation. "You said the Baylor brothers didn't speak much with Quanah Parker. Why are you so sure we can learn anything from talking with this man?" "There you go, assuming it's an exact science. This country is a straight shot from Ulysses, so I figured we would stop here first. Plus, I had a hunch." "Well, your hunch got me shot in the leg. Now I say we move on." I've had enough." Matt started to respond, but he knew Brent was right. They couldn't hang around much longer waiting for Quanah to appear. Matt examined Brant's wound. The bullet, probably a poorly executed reload, had been fired from a sawed-off rifle. The end of the slug protruded from the hole. Removing it would hurt, but the damage was superficial. "It's not that bad, but I need to get the wound cleaned up," Matt said. "Just wrap it up for now. It needs to be clean so it doesn't fester. We only have 2 bags of water. There's a whole creek full right down there. When it gets dark, we can refill the bags. Now sit still. What about a little sip of whiskey for the pain?" Matt eyed his partner critically, then pulled a bottle from his pack. "Get you a couple of pulls, but that's it. You may have to do more shooting." Brant examined the bottle. "Wish I had a glass so I could take my time with my sip. This here's good whiskey." "I don't have a glass." Matt regarded Brant critically. 2 small sips. "If it'll make you happy, I'll just sit here and suffer while you poke around on my leg. You've seen a man with a bullet hole that got festered up, right? You want to be limping around on one leg for the rest of your days? It might be better than listening to you. You're as bad as my mama. A normal man knows when to quit." "Well, maybe I ain't normal." "Oh, dang, Matt, what the hell are you doing? Just leave it be." "I'm pulling the bullet out. It's not even hardly in there." "It's in there good enough so it hurts like hell. Just leave it." "Hang on." Matt rummaged in one of his bags and produced a pair of forceps. "What in the hell?" Matt looked nervously at the surgical clamps. "These are forceps. I decided we needed ourselves a basic medical kit and read up on it. Dr. Elias Cooper suggests a scalpel, forceps, and bone saw as basic tools, as well as gauze, bandages, iodine, and morphine. There are a few other items." "Looks like a fancy pair of tweezers." "Exactly. Now hold still. I'm going to get the lead out of your leg." "Hang on a second." Brant took another large gulp from the bottle. "Take it easy on the whiskey. I'm celebrating. Every day I get a bullet pulled out of my leg by a jackass." "Hold still." "Oh, dang it. No. Oh, God damn it. That ain't. No." "Almost have it." "How the hell am I supposed to hold still when. Oh, dang." "Got it." Matt displayed the slug for Brant's approval. "Let me see that whiskey." "I think I'm gonna spew." A half-second later, Brant emptied the contents of his stomach onto the sandy soil at his side. "You okay?" "Peachy." "Hold still whilst I do one more thing." Matt splashed the open wound with the whiskey. "God dang!" "As a disinfectant." Matt gathered the water bag and poured a bit of water onto the wound and then pulled out a bar of soap. "What are you going to do with that soap?" Brant asked. He had never liked bathing. "This is something doctors in the war learned. The wound must be well cleaned to kill microorganisms." What the hell?" "Tiny creatures first discovered by a man named Hook in the 17th century. Physicians believe they are the primary cause of infection." "I have. No, sir. What the hell are they?" "Microorganisms. They are invisible to the eye and ubiquitous everywhere. As I said, doctors discovered in the war that cleaning wounds reduced infection. Just relax." "How the hell can I relax with these microorganisms in me? Give me that damn bottle." "Brant, relax. I'm sorry I mentioned it. I thought you would find it interesting. I just need to clean the wound." Brent tried his best to relax, watching nervously as Matt applied soap, then dried and wrapped the bullet wound. To take his mind off the ordeal, he redirected his attention to their surroundings, scanning for the return of the native boys. They were alone. Finishing with the bandaging, Matt pulled a small black bottle from his pack. "I suppose a little something for the pain wouldn't hurt." "I don't want any laudanum, Matt." "I'm sorry if it hurt." "I'm good." Matt nodded and settled by Brant's side. "You're right," he said. "I don't need to talk with Quanah. We'll head out in the morning." Hunting Charm, Chapter 14, A Mad Bull. "I can't believe you shot me." Bart had complained about his wound no fewer than 15 times in the past hour. Bucky, feeling simultaneously guilty and annoyed, tried to change the subject. "Dang hot weather," he said. "We ain't gonna get to that creek before dark," Bart grumbled. "I'm hungry. This bullet in my arm's got me worn out. I need food." "It ain't more than a mile to them trees. Then we can settle in and rest for a day." "I wish to hell you'd listen to me once in a while." "What? Why do you have to get to that creek? We could camp right here and get over there in the morning. You act like there's something we can't live without them dang trees. Plus you ain't shot. I can't believe you shot me." "If I hadn't shot you, then the wagon would have run over the other mule and we'd be carrying the supplies. If you hadn't shot me, I could carry half of what the mule's carrying." Bart kicked sullenly at a clump of sod. "Why didn't you just tell me to stop?" Bucky didn't bother reminding his brother that he had told him to stop. "I just said I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say." "Yeah, but you shot me." "I was aiming to shoot the knife out of your hand." "You ain't no gunslinger." "I would have hit the knife, but you moved." "People move, Bucky. That's what people do. They move now and then." "Just stop. You think I don't feel bad about this deal? I'm lucky you didn't shoot me in the gut. I'm tired, brother. I can't walk no more." Bucky looked at his brother, then at the line of trees still a mile away. Bart was right. They wouldn't be able to reach the creek before dark. "Okay, let's get over yonder by that hackberry. I got dibs on the sack of beans for my pillow." Bart pulled the bag from the mule, embracing it with his good arm. "Just let me get a couple of handfuls for dinner. I'm sick of these damn beans. Wish we was back in Abilene where we could get a steak. Maybe we could hunt up a jackrabbit. I heard Rattler makes a mighty good stew. We could mix the snake meat in with the beans. We ain't got no rabbit nor a rattler, so don't get yourself worked up. I ain't even sure I want to cook beans tonight. I'm wore out." Bucky knew his brother wouldn't react well to the notion of going hungry, but they had been walking for over a mile, more than either of them had walked in one stretch in years. "You ain't fixin' beans?" "It's nearly dark already. We ain't got no firewood." "Oh, brother, I'm wasting away." "Bart, no, it's all right. Just give me a handful. I'll suck on a few." "You can't eat uncooked beans, brother." "I wasn't planning on eating them. I just want to hold a few in my mouth." "Dang it, you'll swallow the things whole. Hell, I'll just make a pot."
Can you help find some sticks or buffalo chips for the fire? Brother, my arm has me all dizzy like. Jesus Christ, on a thorny mesquite. Bucky pulled himself up and after gathering a few dried buffalo patties, got a fire started. The beans took nearly 2 hours, enough time for the stars to come out. Bart began snoring. For a moment, Bucky felt he should just let his brother rest. Then he decided against it. If Bart awoke hungry in the night, it would mean more arguing. "Supper's ready," he gave Bart a nudge. Bart, disoriented from his nap, instinctively raised both arms to stretch, then, reminded of his wound, let out a yelp. "I can't move my arm none, and my hand's gone numb," he said. "I done said I'm sorry 20 times, brother. I heard when the man gets shot in the arm, he might just as well cut the thing off lest it gets all rotted up. You think I'm going to need to cut my arm off?" "I don't know, brother. Feels all broken up and blood oozing out. If we need to cut it off, you're going to have to do it. I can't hardly feel my hand." "You done said that, and I ain't cutting off your arm." Bucky and Bart Baylor sat side by side against the hackberry tree, shoveling beans into their mouths. Neither man took note of the gentle sigh of the breeze, the mist of stars that filled the night skies, or the dot of light shining from the Johnson farmhouse less than a mile away. As they finished their meal, Bart complained a final time about the errant gunshot and the lack of bacon, before both men turned in for a restless night under the stars. The next morning, as they staggered to their feet, Bucky couldn't help but notice his brother's bloodshot eyes. "Maybe we should just hit on back directly, without a day of rest like I planned," he said. Bucky had been considering Bart's comment about losing the arm. The notion that they were now on foot had weighed heavily on his mind throughout the night. Without the wagon or anything left to barter with, they might not have the means to get home. They could die trying to walk all the way to Abilene. "I need a day," Bart said. "I can't go no more." "Okay, you're right," Bucky said. He had also been contemplating the question of how to explain the missing wagon. If they did make it back, he couldn't simply tell the truth. What would people say when he talked about how the Comanche had taken one of their mule teams? How would he explain the loss of the third mule and his brother's gunshot wound? On top of everything, what would they say about Doreen? What if she had already turned up back in Abilene? What if she hadn't? Bucky realized he would need to invent 2 or 3 sets of lies. The entire business was getting too complicated to sort. They trudged on across the prairie, Bart moaning pitifully with every step. Shortly before noon they arrived at the line of trees. A decent-sized stream trickled between the cottonwood and oaks. Both men waded in, cooling off. "That feels good." Bart eased himself into the gentle current, splashing his face and shoulders and rinsing his wound. "How's the arm?" "Hurts like fire. Nothing to ask. I was just trying to be brotherly." "The brotherly thing would have been not to shoot me in the first place." They continued bathing in silence. They were both accustomed to hard work, but had never experienced the rigors of the open trail. Both men had lost weight, and both felt weight loss signaled a decrease in their vitality. Bart especially prided himself upon his enormous girth. At work, he had often boasted that he could throw a full-grown bull. Though he had never made good on his bold statement, he had regularly used his girth to shove a stubborn cow up a ramp or into a corral. Now, rinsing his wound, Bart realized he would never enjoy such strength again. Attempts to move his right hand resulted in excruciating pain, a sign that essential elements of his arm were damaged. In addition, he felt Bucky lacked the proper degree of sympathy. At one point, Bart considered pulling his pistol to give his brother a taste of his own medicine. He realized, however, that such an action would not heal his wound and that he might accidentally kill his brother. Despite everything, he wasn't ready to go that far. While Bucky gathered sticks and buffalo chips for a fire, Bart dozed on a patch of sand beneath a tremendous red oak. Bucky, examining his brother, saw that Bart had a pale bluish skin tone and blood continued to ooze from the gunshot wound. It angered him that Bart had steadfastly refused to allow him to wrap the wound. Bucky knew that most folks regarded him as the smarter of the twins. At work, Claude Hallam always addressed him with their daily assignments. The situation hadn't gone unnoticed. "Folks don't ever talk to me," Bart had said on one occasion. "They always speaks to you, and I'm just standing there like a fool." Even their father placed important decisions regarding the farm into Bucky's hands. Though they had been born only minutes apart, Bucky had always been treated like the older brother. When they asked their mother which had come first, she said, "Weren't more than 10 seconds between the two of you. Damn near killed me." Sadly, their mother had died 3 weeks after their 13th birthday, stricken with fever during the blistering heat of late August. Bucky wondered what she might think about their current lives. Neither of them had married. Indeed, even the whores in town seemed to dislike them. His daddy had grown so large he seldom moved from the front porch, where he sat whittling animal figurines from bits of pine. The old man had sold one small section after another of their land to pay the bills over the past 10 years. His mother would be shocked by the decline in the Baylor family fortunes. Bucky had little more than a hazy remembrance of the months following his mother's death. He did recall that at her graveside service his father announced that despite his wife's passing, there would be a Christmas party at the ranch as usual. During those months, his father had seemed determined to carry on as normal, though in retrospect Bucky realized the loss of his mother had crippled them all. In years past, the Baylor Christmas celebration had been a grand event, regarded as one of the highlights on the Abilene social calendar. The Baylor family had been one of the first families to settle there, years before the town itself was founded. Bucky's grandfather, Breland, had built a tremendous farm that encompassed nearly 1,000 acres of tilled land and a full section of wooded lowland filled with bur oak and black walnut. So the announcement about the Christmas party had been widely lauded, though many wondered privately if Beaufort Baylor had the wherewithal to pull things off without his wife. As for Bucky's apple-cheeked mother, Millie, she had been well loved for her baked goods and generous spirit. If anyone fell ill, Millie was there within a day or two with a loaf of bread or cinnamon rolls. Some suggested that the illness that killed her had been contracted when she delivered a loaf of her famous roseberry and basil bread to an elderly man who died of scarlet fever 2 weeks before Millie's passing. The November following their mother's death, as they prepared for the party, Beaufort did his best to pretend that all was well. The evening of the event, with the help of his neighbors and friends, the usual dishes were laid upon tables. Guests in festive holiday attire feasted on plates of barbecued beef, corn on the cob, beans sweetened with molasses, and pickled cabbage. Many of the guests commented that Millie's dinner rolls were sorely missed. Nevertheless, reviews for Beaufort's effort were effusively positive. That evening, musicians strummed, plucked, and fiddled, setting a festive tone as the sun edged to the horizon and the skyline glowed red. As night fell, blazing bonfires took the edge off the December chill, while guests danced, played dominoes, cards, horseshoes, and croquet. As night fell, lanterns were hung, and the women replaced the dinner fare with pies, cakes, cookies, and a steaming cauldron of hot spiced tea. For Bucky, the evening felt surreal. The festivities reminded him of his mother, especially when the time came for the tradition she had cherished most. Each year, with dessert, there was a gift exchange. Guests were asked to bring a child's toy to the party. Boys' gifts wrapped with blue bows, girls with pink or red. The women in town took care to wrap their boxes well, and that year, as in previous years, the pile of gifts beneath the red cedar in the Baylor's front yard stood nearly 4 feet high. The name of every child was written on a slip of paper, and then Santa appeared. In the past, Beaufort Baylor had portrayed St. Nick wearing a red suit, a fake beard made of bleached wood, and an odd homemade mask that never failed to terrify the smaller children. On this occasion, however, because of the tragic circumstances surrounding Millie's death, another local volunteer had taken on the role. As always, as Santa began distributing packages, there was a great deal of cheering as each child opened his or her gift. Bucky spent a long moment trying to remember what he had received that evening, but couldn't. Then it happened, an event that changed their lives inexorably from that day forward. There was periodic applause as each child shredded wrapping paper to reveal a doll or a wooden pistol. Then suddenly everything stopped. Young Gretty Grautower, weeping, blood dripping from her nose, with a torn dress and one breast exposed, had stumbled into their midst. Bucky hadn't understood what was happening at that moment. Indeed, he would not understand fully for 3 or 4 years. He only recalled young Hetty babbling hysterically and pointing toward the barn. Then his father had stumbled out, reeling like a mad bull, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead. The party ended quickly after that, guests slipping away like ghosts. After that night, his father seemed to collapse. The once vital Beaufort Baylor, a man noted for his sense of humor and kind spirit, stopped going into town, neglected the farm, and instead spent his days whittling in morose silence. Later, after they began working at the stockyard and started eating their meals at the local hotel, they rarely saw their father, even though he remained there at the farm. On occasions when they did visit, they hardly spoke. In the years since that night, no one in town, as far as Bucky could recall, ever asked about or mentioned his father. It was as if the once proud Baylor family had ceased to exist. Bucky pieced together details about that night later in his mind. After his father convinced young Hetty to accompany him to the barn and sexually assaulted her, she used a pair of fencing dikes to rebuff Beaufort's advances. Bucky knew Hetty had used the heavy pliers because he recalled picking them up from the floor of the barn the day following the Christmas party. There had also been a blood-stained pair of women's bloomers. Later still, Bucky would realize that innocent Hetty must have been a virgin. Over the years, Bucky had formed other opinions about those times. For example, he came to blame his father for his mother's death, though he couldn't say why. He also felt God had stripped his father of his vitality because of his rape of Hetty Grautower, a conclusion that had some element of truth in it, though probably not due to divine reconciliation. Having lost both parents, his mother to scarlet fever and his father to Millie's death, Bucky changed too. While both twin boys remained fun-loving at times, Bucky experienced moments of rage. There were fistfights at school. On one occasion, an older classmate challenged Bucky over a point in a game of horseshoes. Bucky started screaming, then threw the boy to the ground, pummeling him into a state of unconsciousness. There had been other encounters with fellow students. Bart, who generally followed his brother's lead, usually joined in the fights, and the pair became known as notorious bullies. One afternoon, the teacher asked them to remain after class. Bucky could still recall how the teacher scolded them, then told them they were no longer welcome at school. Up until that moment, Bucky had hated school. They went to work at the stockyards 3 months later, shortly after their 15th birthday. Thinking about the past and their current situation, Bucky felt his anger rise. Any experienced cattle handler, particularly one working in a stockyard, will tell you that sometimes a bull or cow, frightened by unfamiliar surroundings, will run mad. Spooked animals, bulls especially, will charge about, bashing into the corral beams, sending cowhands scrambling for the fences. In a like manner, there by the sandy creek, Bucky grew infuriated. His tirade started slowly. Feeling the need to break something, he tugged at a limb until he separated the enormous branch from the tree. Then, like a raging Damocles, he began swinging the thing, shattering it against rocks and other trees, thrashing around until the thick branch was reduced to splinters and his chest felt like it might explode. When the tirade ended, he hurled the remains of the branch into the creek, then collapsed onto a log, wheezing from exertion. He spent the next 5 minutes regaining his breath. If you had asked Bucky later why he got so angry, he would not have been able to say exactly. The deeper truth was that along with his worries about the situation, Bucky had been hoping to find Cecil Johnson. From the time they first learned that Doreen had possibly left with a colored man, the notion had bothered him. Why would a woman as pretty as Doreen leave in such a way? Was it possible she had gone voluntarily? Was it possible that Doreen, who was known to be lusty in her ways, had an attraction for a colored man? The notion infuriated him every time it crossed his mind. As Bucky sat there, he recalled a previous time when he had dealt with a colored man. It had happened in late May, 2 years earlier. One of the hands at the stockyard, an elderly colored fellow, had paused at Bucky's direct order to open a gate. "Boss man done told us how we ain't to have both gates open at once. Let me just get this other gate closed so's we don't mix these two bunches." Something about the man's tone had enraged Bucky that afternoon. Roaring obscenities, he told the elderly gentleman that he had been about to close his gate. The unfortunate soul who stood there listening, head bowed, didn't lift a finger as Bucky threw him to the ground. Instead, he scuttled away like a pin rider, scrambling to get atop the fences to avoid a raging bull. The old fellow might have escaped that afternoon, except as he scaled the fence, his foot slipped and he tumbled awkwardly back onto the manure-dotted ground. Something about the man's awkward fall, his helplessness, enraged Bucky further, and despite cries for mercy, he lifted the man and slammed him against the oak-railed corral beams again and again until the poor fellow went limp in his arms. There were no consequences for the brutal murder of William Cotton. Bucky wasn't even asked to apologize to the man's wife. The sheriff at the time, an old friend of his father's, agreed the colored pinwriter's death was an unfortunate accident. "We'll just say he fell and got trampled by a mad cow," the sheriff had said. As Bucky sat there on the log, his breath returning to normal, he decided he would spend one more day searching for Cecil Johnson. Based upon the word of a stranger they had questioned 2 days earlier, Bucky suspected they must be getting close to the Johnson place. The man said to look for a pair of low-lying hills that resembled a pair of titties. He said if you came to the Shawnee Trail, you had gone too far. Bucky hadn't seen any sign of the Shawnee Trail. He might not have recognized the dirt trail if he had, but to the south a pair of rounded hills that resembled a pair of breasts had appeared. Despite his brother's injury and the need for a prompt return to Abilene, Bucky wanted closure. No colored man should consort with a white woman. It didn't matter if Doreen had left voluntarily with the mule farmer. It didn't matter if Cecil Johnson had no idea what had happened to Doreen. If Bucky found Johnson, he would have revenge, if for nothing but the trouble they had faced on their journey. With that thought in mind, Bucky's anger surged a second time. He pulled at another branch, this one dead and ready to fall. He barely managed to dodge the limb as it crashed to the ground. It was at that moment, as he stumbled back, that he saw something in the distance. He squinted, not quite sure of what he was seeing at first. Was it an animal? Then it became clear to him, and Bucky smiled. In fact, he felt suddenly lighter than air. He wasn't seeing a deer or a cow. What he saw, partially hidden by the trees, was a person. The person was unaware of Bucky's presence, bathing, perhaps, or simply enjoying a cool dip on a hot afternoon. Bucky couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, an adult or a child. He was able to identify only one detail. The person, whoever they were, whatever they were doing, was black. Hunting Charmed, Chapter 15, A Froward Tongue. 10 days after leaving Abilene, Doreen spent a terrifying night in the Johnsons' storage shed. She burned the lantern until the wick expired from a lack of oil. Replaying the vision of Cactus Branch running away in the moonlight filled her with such terror she cried through the night. By morning, she had convinced herself that she had been raped. At the crack of dawn, the Johnson girl arrived carrying a bowl of oatmeal. "Mama told me to bring you this. She says to tell you my papa be coming out soon to get his tools, so you should be ready." Well, little missy, you tell your mama I get up when I please, and your father can wait. As the child dashed away, Doreen dressed. She knew Johnson couldn't be expected to wait all day, but was, nevertheless, ready to defend her right to be disagreeable. As a guest, she surely deserved some deference. After all, Johnson had failed in his responsibility for her safety. Surely the mule rancher was aware of the brutish monster living nearby. Why hadn't he provided her with greater security? With that thought, she began to cry again. The entire thing was her father's fault, and now here she was in a distant land, surrounded by colored folks who cared nothing about her. She desperately wanted to leave, but had no idea where she might go. And what if she remained? How long would it be before the disfigured man appeared again? She had never felt so helpless in her entire life. She heard the barn door open, then a moment later a rap on her door. "Ma'am, I need to get a couple of things so I can get my chores done. Won't take but half a minute." "Go away," Doreen said. A moment of silence passed, then the mule farmer spoke again. "You okay, missus?" "Go away," she repeated. "Ma'am, I promise this won't take but half a second. I keep the traces for the mule team in there. I'll just grab those and go on quick as you please. Did you get that oatmeal my wife sent? We put a little butter and molasses in there. You come in at a good time as far as food is concerned. We just bought all the—" "Would you please just shut up? I'm trying to sleep." Another long moment passed. When Cecil spoke again, his tone was clipped. "I plan to come on in now and get what I need. It won't take a second." Doreen heard a rattle as Johnson pulled the drawstring. A moment later, sunlight flooded in. "You get out right this moment," Doreen snarled. "This isn't proper. Have you no respect for a lady?" Cecil Johnson didn't speak, but instead gathered a shovel, the mule traces, and a few other tools, placing everything outside the door. During the entire process, a period of no more than 30 seconds, Doreen continued ranting. "If I were in Abilene, I would have you whipped. I don't know who you believe you are, but my father will hear of this, and you'll pay. Do you hear me? Don't ignore me. I won't be ignored. Now, you answer me. What right do you have to come in like this? Answer me. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?" "I hear you. I'm almost done." Cecil spoke firmly and without inflection. Unfortunately, the professional tone that had worked with white recruits during his time at Fort Union only seemed to infuriate Doreen more. "How dare you speak to me like that? You recall what I said to you on the trip here, don't you? About what I said I'd tell my daddy?" Cecil had tried to put aside his worries about Doreen's threats, but now that she had alluded to them a second time, he felt something akin to panic. How could he allow this foolish woman to threaten his family? Without thinking, Cecil's hand clenched around a pickaxe. He turned and raised the tool. Doreen, seeing the raised pickaxe, fell silent. Had she gone too far? For the third time since her arrival at the Johnson ranch, she felt a paralyzing wave of fear. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Cecil paused for a long moment. His threatening stance had been an instinctive response to Doreen's threats. The woman simply didn't seem to realize that her threats might destroy everything he had worked for and endanger the people he loved. Nevertheless, he lowered the pickaxe, his body quivering from adrenaline. Had he really been about to use the tool on Doreen? For a moment, Cecil realized the possibility had been there. Like a trapped animal, he had been prepared to fight. With a low moan of anguish, he fled the room. A long moment passed before Doreen scrambled from the bed and slammed the door. Since there was no lock, she decided she needed a weapon, but found only a flimsy homemade broom. She grabbed the crude whisk, clutching it to her chest, and leaped back onto the bed. She spent the next half hour sobbing, fighting her instinct to flee. Nearly an hour passed before her hysteria fully subsided. She couldn't remain in this place, she realized, but where would she go, and how would she get there? Doreen knew that an attractive woman could earn money at the oldest profession. Thanks to her own naivete in the past, the thought of selling herself for money had even inspired a degree of excitement. After all, she enjoyed sex. Why shouldn't she get paid for it? Still, there was a difference between a romantic liaison and prostituting oneself. When it came down to it, could she do it? There wasn't anything complicated about whoring, but could she stomach spending time with a string of rutting, unattractive men? The question of turning to prostitution as a way out of her predicament went round and round in her mind. It didn't take long for a few rationalizations to present themselves. First, Doreen decided she probably would have some say in who came and went when it came to the use of her own privates. After all, telling someone they had no choice in such a matter would be inhuman, and, if it came down to it, she could probably influence matters to suit her desires. After all, she had always been able to manipulate men. Why would whoring be any different? She even told herself that most men, especially the older, more dignified types, weren't really interested in the act itself, but instead were simply looking for a bit of friendly conversation. And so, with a mix of desperation and a strong dose of self-delusion, it was decided. Doreen figured she could travel to Fort Worth, Dallas, or some other place south of her current location, and once there, find work whoring. The only remaining question was how to begin her journey. She thought about that for another few minutes before admitting to herself that she would need Cecil Johnson's help. But how could she ask the mule rancher for assistance when he had seemed poised to kill her a few minutes earlier? Then Doreen came to a surprising understanding, one she might never have arrived at in less desperate times. She saw that her own behavior had provoked Johnson to raise the pickaxe. To an average person, such reasoning might seem obvious, but for Doreen, an individual habitually immune to the notion that her own actions had consequences, the thought was revelatory. Then another thought occurred to her. Doreen realized that having threatened Johnson, the man would probably be anxious to see her gone. She now dismissed the episode with the pickaxe. Johnson didn't seem like the type to kill anyone. She would simply have to apologize. Atonement, though unpleasant, would be a small price to pay if Johnson agreed to escort her south to Fort Worth. She immediately began framing an apology she would appear contrite, just as she had with her father when she wanted things at home. She would tell the mule rancher she had behaved poorly, that she had never truly intended to tell such awful lies. With her plan fully conceptualized, Doreen felt a renewed sense of confidence. She also realized how exhausted she felt. She would talk to Johnson that afternoon, but first she needed a nap. The interior of the shack felt cool, and with a deep yawn, she curled onto her side, relaxing for the first time since her arrival. The emotions of the morning and previous night drained away. Everything would be fine. As she lay there dozing, another idea occurred to her. Once she reached Fort Worth, she could send a wire to her father telling him that she had no intention of returning home. Not only would the telegram upset him, a thought she relished, but he would likely wire her money if she asked. With a satisfied yawn, Doreen closed her eyes and soon fell soundly asleep. Cecil Johnson busied himself with his usual chores.
The bright spring morning contrasted sharply with his dark mood. He couldn't erase his doubts about the situation. The young woman seemed irrational, and he couldn't dismiss from his mind the disaster that would befall his family if Doreen decided to act on her threats. In his imagination, Cecil envisioned dozens of men brandishing pistols and torches descending upon their modest home. The men would pay no heed to Cynthia and his children's pleas for mercy. Neither would they pause to verify Doreen's lies. They would simply lynch them all and leave their lifeless bodies rotting upon a limb, or worse, instead of lynching, Doreen's would-be rescuers might burn his family alive or bind them by their feet to a team of mules and spook the animals to flay their skin. There were any number of terrible cruelties that white men, filled with self-righteous rage, might inflict upon them. Cecil felt his fists clench involuntarily. He stumbled through his chores, riddled with angst. When Doreen had threatened him on the trail, he had felt her bullying might be a passing whim, a remark made in desperation. Now that she had repeated the threat, however, he felt that he must act. The white woman had no concept of the damage her words might cause. If she did understand, she didn't care. Like most white folks, Doreen saw colored folks as something less than human. But could he kill her? Cecil wasn't sure. By force of habit, he led the milk cow into the stall and placed the bucket beneath her swollen udder. He didn't notice that Bessie gave more milk than usual. Later, when he saddled his mule and rode out to count his herd, he didn't note that 2 of his mares had produced males. It was only when he pulled out his Bible that he paused. Cecil had been reading from the book for several years. He had formed the habit during his days in the U.S. Cavalry when he learned to read. His teacher, one of the lieutenant's wives, had given him the weathered tome. Around 20 of his fellow soldiers had attempted to learn reading in Mrs. Reeves' classroom, but months after the class began, only Cecil and one other man, an Irishman, had come regularly enough to be able to read with any degree of confidence. "I'm very proud of you, Cecil," Mrs. Reeves had said as she presented him with the Bible. "You should read a bit of this every day as practice. You might also find that from time to time the words may guide you." The bindings of the Bible had loosened over the years, so Cecil handled it carefully. The book, with wide margins on the side of each page, was more than just a source of wisdom. It made for a handy notepad, a place to keep track of the number of animals he had at any given time. After jotting down the day's new count, he flipped to a random page. Mrs. Reeves had suggested the approach, saying that perhaps God might, on occasion, guide one to open the book to whatever passage one needed to read. That morning, Cecil prayed that God would guide him to a passage that would tell him what to do about Doreen Tarwater. The book opened to Proverbs. "The righteous shall never be removed, but the wicked shall not inhabit the earth. The mouth of the just bringeth forth wisdom, but the froward tongue shall be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaketh frowardness." He closed the book. Often the language of the Bible confused him. He had no idea what a froward tongue might be. Still, the rest of the verse made some sense. Unfortunately, the passage didn't settle the question in his mind. He had never contemplated or sought divine guidance for the commission of murder. He finished his chores, and as he did, another thought occurred to him. He had come to trust and respect Jake McQueen. Cynthia called the man her father.
Jake had given them many gifts: blankets, firewood, food, and most importantly for his business, the use of grazing land and breeding stock. In fact, Cecil owed Jake money from the sale of the 20 mules. He had planned to wait a few days to get caught up with all his chores, but instead he would go the next afternoon to give Jake his share of the money and ask his opinion about Doreen Tarwater. Cecil hurried to finish his chores, then went inside to get Jake's money. He had hidden the gold from the sale of the mules, over $200, in the recessed space between the adobe wall and the log rafters of their home. After 5 years of having almost no cash, bartering chickens, eggs, and the occasional mule for necessities, the leather bag filled with coins felt like a fortune. Cecil had many plans for the money: a new corral, some tools, and a proper stove for the house, but Doreen's appearance had changed everything. Now he wondered if he should gather his family and animals and find a new home far away. "Go outside and play," Cecil said to his children. He wanted to speak with his wife. Cecil hadn't mentioned Doreen's threats before, but now he had to tell Cynthia. "I'm going to see Jake McQueen. Tell him I send my regards. I need to take him his share of the money." Cecil paused, rubbing his temples. "What's wrong? It's that white woman, isn't it?" Cecil nodded, taking his wife's hand. "She made some threats against us. I didn't say anything about it before because it happened on the trail. When we found out she was hiding in Mr. Sugar's wagon, I said I'd send her back when we got home. She said if we took her back, she'd... well..." Cecil paused for a long moment, knowing his next words would cause his wife great distress. "She said if we sent her back, then she'd tell everyone we took advantage of her." Cynthia sat in stunned silence, then said, "Why didn't you tell me about this last night?" "I should have. I thought she was just fearful of us taking her back, that she didn't really mean it." "So why are you telling me now?" Cynthia looked at him keenly, then guessed the answer. "She said it twice now, didn't she?" "I had to go into the shed this morning to get some tools, and she just got upset. I told her to hush up, and that didn't set well. That's when she reminded me about how she said what she said." "That woman is the devil," Cynthia whispered. "The devil sent his servant in here to ruin all we worked for. I'm going to talk with Jake, see what he thinks is best." For a moment, Cynthia seemed to shrink. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes faded. "I don't want to leave our home. We worked hard on this here. Where will we go?" Cecil felt a deep sense of helplessness. He reached out and took his wife in his arms, holding her tightly. "It's okay," he whispered. It's gonna be all right." Unfortunately, Cecil couldn't be certain things would be fine. Cynthia was right. Everything they had built together could be taken in a moment if Doreen repeated her threats to the wrong person. He stood thinking once more that he should act right then. He reached for his rifle, mounted in a rack above the door. "What are you doing?" Cynthia asked. "That gal's folks in Kansas City probably ain't got any idea where she might be." "How do you know that?" I can't just let her ruin us." Cecil took the rifle down, then from their dresser retrieved a box of cartridges. "Cecil, stop!" Cynthia stared at him. "No, I'm going to end this. Don't try to stop me." "Look here, Cecil." Cynthia pointed at the wooden hills surrounding their ranch. "We gonna just throw everything away? Now stop for a minute. You was right before. We need to talk with Jake first, just like you said." "She's going to tell folks sometime or another. She has that terrible lie in her head.
and it's going to come out. She's just that kind of gal. We ain't like real folks to her. We ain't nothing to her, just some colored folks that ain't worth more than a few dollars to buy or sell. Cynthia placed a hand on Cecil's chest and the other on the rifle. We may need to kill her. God help us, but we may. Did you tell those folks in Abilene where we live? Think, Cecil. He paused for a long moment, trying to recall if he had taken the time to explain the location of their ranch to any of the men at the stockyards. White folks weren't much interested in talking about anything but my mules. I reckon I told them we live in Indian Territory. Indian Territory is a big patch of land, but there is folks who knows we're here. Did you tell them which tribe you lived with? Cynthia grasped her husband's shoulders, peering desperately into his eyes. This is about your soul now, Cecil. Did you say how we lives in Creek Territory? No, I don't think so. Cynthia took a deep breath, stroking her husband's arm to calm him. So even if they know we live in Oklahoma, they can't possibly find us right away. Most likely it will take several weeks to figure out where we live. That means we don't have to do anything right this minute. She ain't going to take our home. A woman like that figures colors folks don't know much. A thought had occurred to Cynthia. She figures as how she's smarter than us, and I'll just go on letting her think that. We need to find out if she told anyone where she was going. I'll talk to her. She ain't smart, not like she thinks. If we find she came here without telling anyone, then we can use this. Cynthia touched the rifle, looking directly into Cecil's eyes. Remember, though, God don't take lightly to killing folks. We got to remember that. God don't care about colored folks. Cecil said he doesn't care about us. Yes, baby, he does. He cares, and he'll see us through this. Now you go on and you visit Jake. Take him his money and tell him about this white woman. See what he thinks. Hunting Charm, Chapter 16, A Strange Dream. Hunter, you figure those boys are gone? Matt asked. I reckon they probably are, Brent said. I killed one of them, though. Hunter, he shot you. You had no choice. I suspect the older men will be looking for retribution. Maybe so, Matt said. I know you've heard stories about these folks, Matt. That Linville massacre and gals kidnapped and disfigured or killed. These folks have different ways. Quanah's own mother is white, and the story is she refused to leave her Indian family. There's good and bad in everyone. But some of those stories... What was that gal's name that had her nose burned off? Matilda Lockhart. I know, Brent. The stories are terrible. You know that fella I write to sometimes, Crater McLean? He says these folks do those things as part of their culture. He says they expect white folks would do the same to them if given the chance. Yeah, but we wouldn't. We don't kidnap children and then torture them. Matt nodded. I don't understand it, but Crater has had dealings with these folks. He fought against Buffalo Hump. He was at Plum Creek and was involved with all that business with the Pennatica bunch. Like I say, I just don't know. I need to take a leak. I'd hold it until dark if I could. I just don't understand how you figure we can trust these folks. I go on my gut and what I know. Like this situation, Quanah has shown he's reasonable at times. I can't believe he would sanction what these boys did. Maybe he didn't know. It's not like these folks have any central government.
Old Kit Carson learned that, sure enough. Quanah was a boy when that happened. Okay, well, what about Salt Creek? Hunter, you're right, okay? The stories on Quanah are mixed. From what I understand, though, these disputes are over killing buffalo. Maybe he just doesn't like white folks. His mama is white. He's half white man. If I understand the situation, buffalo hunters have been coming in, killing off the herds, and that's at least part of it. You don't just go killing a man's stock and expect him to take kindly to it. Matt, we need to move on. I'm serious now. Quanah didn't send these boys in here. He isn't the type of man who sends out a group of boys to do a man's job. Plus, Sam said that was Peter Nakona here the other day. That's Quanah's father. If Quanah wanted us killed, he'd do it himself. According to the papers, Nakona died on the reservation. The papers get things wrong sometimes. Well, he might kill us yet. Maybe so. What do you figure on doing if Quanah comes in here with a couple of hundred braves? Pray I get killed fast. The afternoon sun shone relentlessly, but Brant had chosen the spot for his fort wisely. Towering elms provided shade, and the riverbed channeled a southwesterly breeze into their makeshift fortress. The hypnotic chirring of grasshoppers and sound of the gentle current flowing by were like a lullaby. Wake up! Huh? What? Keep your head down and look over yonder. Matt pointed. I must have fallen asleep, and I reckon you did too. Peering at, Brant immediately saw the reason for Matt's concern. 50 or 60 feet away, uncomfortably close, a group of Comanche warriors, some mounted, all well armed, stood talking among themselves. Brant could see that some of the boys from earlier sat on the ground to one side. One of the older men towered over them, lecturing. That there is Sam and Nakona, Matt whispered. One of those riders must be Quanah. The boys are with them. They must know we're over here. I think they're waiting for us to say something. Matt stood up. Hello, gentlemen, he called out. Dang it, Matt, Brant hissed. You might let me get my weapon ready. The group of native warriors turned, including the man lecturing the boys. After a few words among themselves, one of the native warriors stepped forward. These boys made a foolish decision. They thought they might kill you and take your things. We are here to parley, not to fight. Matt stood, easing himself up and onto one of the logs surrounding their fortress. We're sorry about the young man. It wasn't our intention to shoot anyone. He came at me suddenly and I shot him. Brant stepped from the hole as well, placing his pistol carefully on the ground. It wasn't my choice to kill him. He is the son of Tall Tree. The speaker for the group pointed to one of the warriors, a powerful-looking man with broad shoulders who gazed at Brant with a neutral expression. The boy died as a warrior. His death will not be held against you. You are safe. My name is Matt Grayson, and this here is my partner, Hunter Brantley. I am Isate, the speaker replied. Perhaps we can sit more comfortably and talk. He gestured to the circle of logs. We're here to ask about some white men. 2 big men in a wagon that passed through here about 4 weeks ago. Matt walked toward the group, Brant following. The Fat Brothers, yes, we remember them. We will answer your questions, but not here. We will ride with Quanah to our camp. Isate pointed to a tall warrior who sat astride a black stallion. This won't take 10 minutes, Matt said. We don't want to trouble you. No. Quanah looked at Matt with a steady gaze. then spoke rapidly in his native tongue. Quanah says we won't answer your questions here. You must come to our camp. There is something you must do there. Matt paused, then nodded. We appreciate your offer, but we really need to get on the trail. When I spoke to Sam and Nakona, I promised I would give Quanah a pistol. The tall white man is hunting something, Isate said, looking at Brent. Peter will help him with his search. I'm sorry, Matt said. We will answer your questions about the Fat Brothers, but there is another matter. Peter has something important for your partner. Isate pointed at Brent. In the past few years, a man named Mackenzie killed many of our people. He drove us like cattle onto the reservation. But our dreams began to die there. Our spirits lost power. Here, our vision returns. Peter Nakona saw the tall white man in his dreams and learned your fate is tied to our own. Nakona says you will be there with the people when the world ends. What does Peter mean by that? Matt asked. We understand that our ways are different, Isate continued. Quanah will not answer your questions here, but you are safe. You are our guests. Please gather your things so we may travel to our homes. How far is your camp? It isn't far. We will arrive there tomorrow. They packed quickly and, trailing Quanah's group, rode for the remainder of the day. Around sunset, they made camp on an outcropping of sandstone near a wide playa lake that reflected the heavens so perfectly one could hardly tell where the water ended and the skies began. The Comanche warriors started cooking fires. They feasted on prairie grouse, rabbit, and a bitter hardtack of juniper berries and nuts. Matt suggested they forego the tents and, like the native warriors, sleep beneath the stars. They woke early and traveled through the day, stopping occasionally at streams or playa lakes to water their mounts. Around mid-afternoon, they came to a sprawling canyon. Matt had heard stories of a great canyon in the Texas Panhandle, but was astounded gazing down at the tremendous hole. The canyon was vast, stretching for miles. Red dirt escarpments like the folds of a Spanish festival dress adorned the hillsides. Far below, like pins on a map, dozens of teepees stood alongside a river that snaked away into the distance. This must be their main camp, Matt said. We may be the first white folks to see this place. Brant, uneasy at the thought of entering such a large settlement of Comanches, pointed towards Quanah and Isate. We sure these folks are friendly? He asked. There's only one way to find out. Matt eased his mount closer to Quanah and Isate. My people. Quanah motioned toward the village below and with a sweep of his arm said, Our home. It's magnificent, Matt said. I imagine you have several hundred folks out here. We tried to live on the white man's reservation in Oklahoma, Isate said. We were given rotten blankets and spoiled food in exchange for peace. Our people, the Quahada, could not live in that way. We do not care for the white man's stinking blankets or their potatoes covered with mold. Mackenzie can come and kill us all. We would rather die here. Quanah spoke to Isate for a long moment, then looked into Brant's eyes, holding his gaze as Isate translated. Quanah says white men pretend to have great, kind hearts. He thinks they mean well, but they claim things for their own. that are not theirs. My people don't understand why they must leave. White men are not living here. It is only us. This has always been our home. Mackenzie says this is Texas, but we are only people. There are no Texans. We do not know any Texans, so we will remain here until Mackenzie or these Texans force us to go. We are not the bringers of war and death. That is the white man. Why is it so important to Mackenzie and the Texans to take our homes? Quanah dismounted and pulled a small cluster of yellow flowers from the ground. Again he spoke to Isate, gesturing first at the flowers, then sweeping his arm across the horizon and skies. This flower is like the white man. They spread and cover the world. The white man may take all that we have, but you cannot have our spirits. You will be safe here, for Quanah assures your protection. Still, you must not expect my people to express their love. Matt dismounted, stepping to Quanah's side, gazing at the tiny flowers in the chief's hand. We appreciate your hospitality. Quanah thinks the white men could learn from the people. Isate continued, translating as Quanah spoke. He thinks white men believe they are civilized, but despite their plows and axes and guns, the people are more human. Brant, listening, felt the moment might be right for a drink. He reached back and pulled the bottle of scotch from his saddlebag. Matt looked at him sternly. Hunter, not right now. I was just trying to be friendly. Brent felt a bit let down, sensing that once again his actions were inappropriate. It seemed to be the story of his life. Nevertheless, both Isate and Quanah nodded at the sight of the bottle. The chief and his translator don't seem to be offended, Brant said. Sensing Quanah's interest, Matt gave a nod, took the bottle, and passed it to the chief. Brant's right. Let's have a toast to our friendship, he said. Quanah paused for a moment, grinned at Matt, and took the bottle. He peered at the amber fluid, raised the drink to his mouth, and took a long pull. The proud warrior winced, then nodded in satisfaction. Good, he said. Quanah passed the bottle to Matt, who said, Well, I reckon having a little sip won't hurt none. Matt passed the bottle back to Brant, who took only a small sip before passing it on to Isate. Quanah said a few more words, and Isate turned once again to translate. Quanah says tonight we will drink plenty and enjoy time as brothers. That sounds like a fine idea, Matt replied. The descent down the winding trail took over an hour. When they arrived, a group of residents, mostly women and children, gathered and greeted the men with respectful bows and smiles. Brent and Matt dismounted, hats in hand, while Quanah greeted 3 different women, his wives. Finally, the chief turned and motioned them forward, introducing them in the Comanche language. The residents of the village nodded, their expressions neutral. Matt recalled Isate's warning that they should not expect love from the people. You may pitch your tents between the creek and Quanah's lodge. Isate pointed at an ornately decorated teepee and a narrow stream beyond. We will talk about the 2 fat brothers now. Isate motioned for Matt to follow. Brent found a shaded spot beneath a cottonwood, and after pitching the tents, built a small campfire. Matt returned a few minutes later, but said nothing of his conversation about the Baylor brothers. Instead, he crept into his tent, saying he needed time to think. Brent pulled a pot from his pack and started coffee. A group of children played nearby. They paid Brent little attention at first, but then one of the boys, a child of perhaps 6 or 7, dashed forward with a stick, mimicking an attack. Soon thereafter, the other boys and girls took their turn, some giggling, but others with grim expressions. At one point, a small girl, only 3 or 4 years old, waddled through the water brandishing a pointed stick. Bravely, the girl drew closer and closer until she stood only 2 feet from Brent. She smiled broadly and poked him with the spear. "You going to get me?" Brent feigned distress. The other children emerged from the brush and stood watching the exchange. The little girl continued her attack, giggling each time Brent cowered. Finally, she poked the stick bravely into Brent's chest. He clutched it between 2 fingers, tumbling off the log, playing dead. The little girl laughed in delight, dancing and clapping. One of the older boys trotted up and began scolding her. Brent couldn't be sure if the boy felt the girl was too friendly or the game too serious. The little girl stuck her tongue out at the boy, giggled again, and tottered away. As the sun reached the horizon, shading the clear skies in infinite blue, Matt awoke from his time to think and joined Brent, pouring himself some coffee. He stepped cautiously, stretching. "Quanah didn't know much about the Baylor brothers," he said. "Mostly what I knew already. So we spent 4 days waiting to talk, killed a boy, and didn't learn anything." He didn't know anything about the Baylors, but he did have some information about Cecil Johnson. Did I mention how the Baylors told me there had been some sort of trouble at the Johnson ranch? They claimed Cecil Johnson's wife set fire to her family's home. It didn't make a lot of sense. It was another example of how those brothers had a dishonest recollection of things. At any rate, I guess the Kiowa have a settlement to the north of here. They're the ones saw Johnson, or the man that may be Johnson. It may be that the Baylor brothers were right about Johnson's place being burned out. Truth is, they may have done it themselves. The wife may be dead. Well, what about Cecil Johnson? Is he still alive? I asked about that. Matt sipped his coffee, pulling out his tobacco pouch. "Roll us one." He flipped Brent the cloth bag. According to these Kiowas, Johnson wasn't killed. They saw 2 colored men traveling with a herd of mules and ponies, a wagon, and 2 children. "You sure that's Johnson?" Johnson had a hired man in Abilene. According to the Baylors, the Johnsons had 2 or 3 children. Being burned out would explain them moving. Quanah didn't say anything about a woman with them. That's why I say Johnson's wife may be killed. Okay, what else? Quanah's men said they were traveling west. Matt pulled his notepad from his pocket and thumbed through the pages. Johnson served in the military, Fort Union. We were over there a few years ago, right after the war, chasing that doctor who killed those boys. That was one sorry son of a bitch. Is that the man with the scatter gun? He peppered me good. Anyway, it looks like Johnson is heading west. California maybe, or Oregon. They have some open territory up that way. He may still have friends at Fort Union. So, we gonna ride that way? It takes us the opposite way we were planning to go. Johnson's ranch is to the east, Creek territory. You're in charge. As the skies turned from glowing red to a rich shade of terracotta, a young Cherokee man carrying a smoldering torch appeared. In stumbling English, he said the celebration would start soon. They could already hear the rhythmic thud of a drum and the sinuous trill of a flute, both amplified by the Spanish skirts of Paladura Canyon. "I reckon Quanah would find it unneighborly if we didn't join in." Brent felt nervous, as he always did before parties. "This isn't optional, Brent. Plus, you're the honored guest. Pita Nakona has something for you, remember? Just eat and drink what they give you. Try to enjoy yourself. Isate said you're going to receive your spirit animal."
"What does that even mean?"
"I guess we'll find out." They entered a central clearing with a blazing bonfire surrounded by teepees and a handful of wattle and daub structures. Quanah, with Isate by his side, motioned to a pair of sling chairs near the fire. To one side, a group of dancers wearing paint and ornate costumes stood talking. Other residents settled around the fire, some with chairs of their own or blankets. The dancers began circling, warming up, and the drummer began to sing, his voice meshing seamlessly with the flute and the rhythmic heartbeat of his drum. Quanah's wives and a pair of children, all wearing ornate clothing and solemn expressions, settled alongside Matt and Brent. Quanah lifted his hand. The drumming and singing stopped, and the conversation of the gathering crowd quieted. As Quanah spoke to the assemblage, a pair of younger men appeared and placed a gigantic headdress on his head and draped an enormous buffalo cape around his shoulders. The great chief spoke for several minutes. At times there were chuckles and a good deal of nodding in agreement. Then, with a sweep of his arm, Quanah motioned toward the teepee nearest the fire. Everyone turned. The drummer resumed the nearly inaudible beating heart. The teepee opened and Nakona appeared, followed by 3 elderly women. The old chief walked slowly and, with the help of his wives, settled into a sling chair. Isate appeared alongside Matt and Brent and translated as Quanah continued. "My father, Pita, grows old. The old man's papers said he died on the reservation of smallpox. He did not, though. He will die here with the Quahada. He has asked that no white man know of his death, save these 2. Pita asked them to hold this secret within their hearts." Matt and Brent both nodded their agreement, and Quanah, bowing slightly, moved back to his place alongside his wives. The crowd began conversing again, some of them peering curiously at Matt and Brent. For the next half hour, people moved freely around the fire, settling, socializing, and sharing food. Quanah's wives brought plates of dried fruit, corn, nuts, pemmican, and smoked meats. Matt nodded positively at the flavor of one of the treats. "It's deer or wild pig. Try some." Brent, recalling Matt's exhortation, took a bite and found the jerky surprisingly good. The musicians continued improvising, providing accompaniment to the sounds of conversation and laughter. Then, at some indiscernible signal, the drumming stopped. The conversation, likewise, dwindled slowly to inaudible murmurs. When the music started again, it was the flute only, the musician vocalizing through the instrument, creating chirps and growling tones that sounded vaguely like the call of birds or other wildlife. From the shadows, a solitary dancer appeared, circling gracefully. The performer wore circular arm shields and a headdress of gray feathers. He stopped before Quanah, balancing on one leg, pulling himself upward like a skilled ballet master. With a boom, the drum joined and the flute trilled. Gracefully, the dancer thrust his legs skyward, arms outstretched, head held high. Lizard tongue imitates the hawk, climbing, one claw holding his prey, the other reaching for the sky. Isate said. The dancer turned, still on one leg, the beat of the drum quickening. A pair of new dancers appeared. The hawk is greeted by the bear and the puma. The drummer began to sing while the new dancers, both shaking gourds, added sinuous rhythms to the steady beat. Brant felt a nudge and was handed a smoldering pipe. He considered passing it on, then he recalled Matt's advice. He raised the pipe and pulled the sweet smoke in, releasing it through his nose, enjoying the aroma. He took a second puff and felt some of the tension leave his back and shoulders. Despite himself, Brant smiled as he passed the pipe to Isate. Matt presented a bottle of Old McFarland's to Quanah. Soon, along with the bottle, gourds filled with a milky brew that Isate explained was made from corn circled the assembled crowd. The music, along with the drink and smoke, transported Brant to a more comfortable place. Soon he was grinning broadly. When a fourth dancer emerged, dressed magnificently with feathered armbands that resembled the wings of a fantastic bird, he sat rapt. He realized that a people he had always regarded as savages were, in truth, the creators of a magnificent cultural heritage. The new dancer wore wrist and ankle bands with tiny bells attached, adding a new element to the music. The drumming grew more intense, quickening. The sounds and the movements of the dancers, along with the bells, flute, bass drum, and mournful singing coalesced, and, along with Isate's narration, provided an entertaining show. Quanah says to eat this. Isate presented Brant with a bowl containing a small amount of green mush and an ornately carved wooden spoon. What is it? Brant looked curiously at the mixture. Peyote. It will make you sick. Then that will pass and the cactus will lead you, with Peta's help, to your spirit animal. Brant looked at Peta and once more imagined the man winked at him. Is everyone eating this? Brant asked. It is only for you, Isate said. When you are sick, do not worry. It will pass quickly. For a moment, Brant considered returning the bowl to Quanah, but then, once again, he recalled Matt's words. Gathering a bit of the greenish mush with the spoon, he placed it into his mouth. The taste was strong, bitter, and repellent, but he forced himself to swallow. He was handed a gourd of corn liquor to wash away the bitter taste. Isate nodded and took the bowl. Now you need only relax. Soon you will find your spirit animal. As the dance continued, Brant noticed many of the villagers looking at him, their eyes glittering, reflecting the light from the bonfire. He shifted uneasily. At first everything felt normal. He was handed the pipe again, drew from it and passed it. Then the bottle of whiskey came and went, though he wasn't sure if he tasted it or not. The fire had taken on a life of its own, moving like a fifth dancer, multiple arms darting and flickering on all sides. You okay? Matt's query echoed in Brant's brain. He leaned forward, his stomach churning, and vomited into the dirt. A woman appeared instantly, cleaning the mess with a bit of straw, then disappearing. Brant peered at Matt, wanted to say something, but before he could speak, two dancers, the puma and the bear, appeared before him. A moment later they parted, and the ornately dressed bird extended a hand, feathered body silhouetted against the bonfire. Come with me, the bird said. Instinctively, Brant reached out and took the dancer's hand. Without sound or effort, they were airborne, the music fading, the dancers, fire, and assembled crowd growing smaller beneath him. Miles away on the canyon rim, looking down at the teepees and distantly glowing bonfire, the magnificent bird spoke. "Your spirit is here." Her voice swirled in Brant's mind like the jingling of bells. "It is the puma, a powerful spirit. There is only one such. Pape said it would be so." Brant turned slowly, and there on a rock by his side rested a gigantic mountain lion, eyes glowing in the moonlight. "Do not fear your spirit." Brant turned, but the speaker, whoever it was, had disappeared. Hadn't someone else been there with him? He drew his pistol, squaring himself as the mountain lion snarled. The roar of the wild animal filled him with fear, but he held his ground. Was this a wild animal before him, or Peta? He couldn't say. The antelope turned gracefully, fleeing him, but too slow. With digging claws, he grasped the frantic deer's hind quarters, pulling the prey to the ground, holding the animal as it suffocated. The deer shivered, eyes rolling. A hot spurt of blood filled his mouth. He feasted, gorging himself, then dragged the carcass into a stand of oak brush. Sated, he returned to his lair, moving slowly, belly full, grooming to remove the antelope's blood from his fur. As he felt himself drift off to sleep, Pape entered. "This is yours." The old warrior draped a circular pendant made of yucca strings around Brant's neck. "This hunting charm will lead you to your prey." "This is mine?" Hunter gazed at the dream catcher. "Our spirits are the same," Pape whispered. He woke the following morning somehow back inside his tent. He crawled outside, head reeling, wondering if he might find a bit of whiskey to ease his pounding skull. What had happened the night before? Stumbling to the creek, Brant rinsed his face in the trickling stream, his attention held rapt for a moment by the bit of redness from his beard curling away in wispy lines. Was it blood from the deer? What deer? He had been sitting by the fire, then what had happened next? There had been a mountain lion and an antelope feasting on warm meat. The metallic taste of blood instinctively reached to his chest. The circular pendant woven from yucca strings hung there, just as he recalled from his dream. Had his head ever hurt this badly? He drank deeply, the chilly water easing his parched throat. He considered shedding his clothes for a bath, but recalling the children from the previous day, decided against it. He splashed his face a few more times, then trudged unsteadily back up the embankment. He found a pot of coffee in an enameled cup sitting on a rock near the campfire. He sat down and went over what had happened in his mind. He recalled smoking a pipe, sage, and tobacco, shots of whiskey, and milky corn beer. Then there was the vile green mush none of the others had eaten from the bowl. His flight with the flaming bird seemed connected to the, what had Isate called it, peyote. He recalled being sick. Then the dancer had approached, and together they had flown. "Well, you look like you're feeling good this morning." Matt appeared from somewhere. Had he been there all along? "What the hell happened last night?" "Well, sir, according to the host, you found your spirit animal." "What the hell does that mean? Did I go somewhere?" If you did, I was drunker than I thought. We had to drag your ass back to camp after you passed out. You ain't no small man, Hunter."
"I passed out? I didn't go anywhere?"
"No, sir. You threw up, then you curled up there by the fire. You woke up for a minute when that old feller, Pete Nakona, gave you that necklace."
"He said this was a hunting charm." Brant displayed the intricately woven pendant.
"No, sir. Pete didn't say anything. Just hung that deal on your neck and left for his teepee. Quanah told me his father gave you the necklace because he plans to die soon. I reckon the Comanche know when they're gonna die. Makes no sense to me. I reckon a man knows when he's sick and old. How do you figure a man knows when he's about to die, though?"
"Interesting.
You think I'll know when my time is coming?"
Matt stopped for a long moment, pondering his question, then said,
"You know, it was curious the way Nakona looked at you. Gave me an odd feeling, to tell the truth. These native folks have strange ways."
"Why, what did he do?"
"He waved his hand over your head."
Matt paused, looking out across the canyon.
His expression changed to one of deep consideration. Then he said, "It wasn't that he looked at you so much as, well, he kind of had that same expression you get sometimes, like he was determined to get something done and wasn't nothing gonna stop him. Then he—" Matt paused a second time, then spoke in a mystical and perhaps mocking tone. "Well, he touched you, and I swear this is gonna sound funny, but when he put his hands on you, now you understand it was dark, but when he put his hands on you, there was this spark, maybe?"
Matt chuckled.
I'm just playing with you. I didn't see anything. There was no spark. The old man put that deal around your neck, and that was it."
Brant looked uneasily at his partner, his thoughts returning to the previous evening. In the dream, or whatever had it been, Nakona had given him something more than just the circular charm woven with strings. The second gift had been less palpable, nothing one could reach out and touch. Still, the revelation, the bit of insight Nakona had imparted, had been profound. Despite Brant's hungover state, the morning seemed brighter somehow, and as he looked around, Brant's relationship with the world seemed clearer, less uncertain. "I spoke to those braves that saw Cecil Johnson come through here a week or so ago. I guess some of the Kiowa folks were at that deal last night. We need to get on the trail." Brant, rather than feeling annoyed by the prospect of a butt-bruising day on horseback, recalled something else Peta Nakona had said to him in his dream. "The charm will lead you to your prey." "I'm ready. Let's do this." Brant stood and stretched himself. Then he looked at Matt for a long moment, grinning. "Damn, head hurts, but dang if it ain't a nice morning." Matt gave Brant a long look. Something about his sometimes sullen partner seemed different. Matt saw something in the rangy cowboy that he hadn't seen in some time, though he couldn't put a finger on it. Plus, Brent was right. The morning was glorious. The escarpments of the canyon, coral, salmon, and ochre seemed especially colorful in the light cresting the horizon, while the skies, deep blue, streaked with wisps of white, looked like an impossibly calm lake, vast and infinite. An eagle soared far above, solitary and majestic, turning, diving and wheeling in the air before disappearing behind the rim of the canyon. Matt had been wondering if Brent had lost something to the booze. Over the past year or more, it had seemed,
More and more like the man he loved as a brother had been replaced by a morose drunk who stumbled through his days and tossed restlessly through the night. On this morning, however, Matt saw something different. Not the return of the old Brent, but something similar. He hoped it would last. "Are you just going to stand there with your mouth open looking at the sky?" "No, all right then. Let's hit the trail."
Chapter 17. Jake McQueen. Jake McQueen received his surname from a white man who married his grandmother when the Muskogee tribe still occupied much of the state of Mississippi. According to the story, his grandfather killed his grandmother's native husband, then raped his grandmother, then married her. Unfortunately, 6 months after that, his white grandfather, Bevan McQueen, announced he had a wife in Pennsylvania and left, never to be heard from again. His grandmother, who had never liked Bevan that much anyway, after all, he had killed her husband, soon found a new man and had 4 more children. Jake's grandmother decided to keep the last name McQueen. Before his unceremonious departure, Bevan McQueen told her that the Queen ruled the entire world, and Jake's grandmother liked that idea. She thought perhaps by keeping the name, her sons might become kings and rule their own lives. In those days, when the white men ignored treaties and simply moved on to their lands, taking everything, it didn't feel like the Muskogee ruled much of anything. After losing the war between the Creek people and the American Army, the tribe embarked on a series of terrible relocations into Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and finally into the Indian territories. When they arrived, they weren't sure if this new land would be their permanent home. It wasn't the first time soldiers issued blankets, tools, and empty promises. The Muskogee weren't accustomed to living in teepees and tents like the Plains tribes that came and went, sometimes helping and other times killing. In Mississippi, Jake's forefathers had lived in solid lodges built of wood and clay. If they had only had more experience in moving, then maybe things might have been easier. Fortunately, in the new place, trees were plentiful, and the white men had given them good axes. Jake, 12 when they first arrived, spent endless freezing days clearing limbs from trees felled by the older men. With logs, they built a single lodge where over 20 people spent the first winter. To survive, they ate mules and horses and wild onions, acorns, and cattails gleaned from the surrounding area. One afternoon, his mother, the woman called Crazed Tongue, left the lodge to forage in the forest and never returned. They found her later, dead, seated with her back against an oak tree. Jake's father died a few weeks later from the coughing sickness. During those days, as freezing winds howled around the lodge, Jake never enjoyed a moment's rest. He spent each day chopping wood, hunting, or gathering whatever he could to help feed everyone. Meanwhile, his father's second wife grew ill. When she died, Jake was left to care for his 3 younger siblings. 2 of the 3 would die in March, again of coughing sickness. Of the 23 members of the McQueen clan who began the winter in the lodge, only 8 remained at the beginning of May. The 4 surviving adults, Jake, now 13, was considered one of the adults, decided they would not build another lodge as originally planned. Instead, they concentrated their efforts on improving and expanding the single building and clearing 2 fields for cultivation. That summer, more family arrived, an older uncle with a wife and a son,
A pair of brothers who had been living in Arkansas with their frail mother, and a distant cousin who had a pair of mules, 2 wives, 2 teenage sons, and perhaps most helpful, 3 slaves, 2 men and a stout woman. Despite the warmth of summer, the coughing sickness remained, and 3 more died. Still, over an 8-month period before the first snowfall in December, the men managed to kill over 50 deer and filled a smokehouse with meat. With seeds given them by the U.S. cavalry, they harvested nearly 8 bushels of corn, and the following winter passed with only 2 deaths. The third winter, Jake traveled regularly to another Muskogee lodge a few miles to the east. He married that winter, and the following year his first daughter was born. Because the coughing sickness continued to claim lives, especially children and the old, Jake decided to build a lodge of his own. With the help of his one remaining uncle and a cousin, a loose term that had come to mean any Creek tribesman that arrived, he constructed a second lodge and cleared a nearby field to grow maize. As the fourth winter set in, Jake finally began to feel at home in his new surroundings. He grew stronger, muscles bulging from felling trees, plowing fields, harvesting crops. By chance, he purchased a male donkey from a desperate cavalryman and erected a small corral where he penned several other wild ponies gleaned from the surrounding countryside. Though he had no knowledge of breeding horses, mules, or hinnies, his herd expanded to include those breeds. His family grew as well. The year Jake turned 18, his second wife gave birth to his second child, a son. That summer, Jake traveled to southern Kansas with 10 ponies, which he traded for supplies and 2 slaves, a man and Cynthia. The tribal elders, noting Jake's industry, invited him to join their council. At the age of 22, following the death of his last remaining uncle, Jake became the oldest male heir in his family and a Muskogee chieftain. In addition, his second son came, and Jake took a third wife, who gave birth to a daughter the following summer. The war between the states came, and soldiers wearing both gray and blue marched through. Forts, renovated or newly constructed, became hubs of activity, and on one afternoon the sounds of rifles and cannon echoed like distant thunder. The conflict between North and South had a mostly positive effect on Jake's fortunes, thanks to sales of lumber and livestock to both sides. Only on one occasion did a band of 3 rebel mutineers arrive and, at gunpoint, take several things. Sensing the men were outlaws, not government agents as they claimed, Jake found the men 2 nights later camped in a ravine 10 miles from his place. With the help of 5 fellow Creek warriors, he took their lives and their scalps, something he had never done before and would never do again. Following the war, a man dressed in a dusty suit came through and told Jake that a new law granted slaves their freedom. Jake, realizing he needed workers, offered each of his former slaves a parcel of land in exchange for part of their crops. Some remained, others left. Others arrived from Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Jake's community grew. When Cecil Johnson married Cynthia, Jake felt a sense of pride equal to that felt by any father. He had seen Cynthia grow from a silent teen into an adult woman with deep reserves of strength. On the afternoon Cecil Johnson arrived at Jake's home to deliver the money from his trip to Abilene, Jake had already heard about the white woman. He had reached a conclusion about what must be done. When Jake gave Cecil his opinion, Johnson remained silent for a long moment, then said, "You may be right." The Creek chieftain considered refusing the mule money, but knew Cecil would insist he take it. Even so, Jake counted out 40 of the 120 gold coins and returned them to Cecil as a belated dowry for Cynthia. Jake's intuition told him Cecil wouldn't follow his advice. They would need the money.
Chapter 18, A Desperate Plan. When she awoke from her nap, Doreen felt a renewed sense of purpose. As she lay in Mr. Sugar's bed, she reviewed what she wanted to say to Cecil Johnson. When she stepped outside looking for the rancher, however, she saw only a couple of mules and the little girl who had come that morning with breakfast. "Where's your Mama and Papa?" Doreen asked. "Mama inside and Papa ain't here," the girl stuttered. "Go fetch your Mama, child." The girl scurried away, and a few minutes later Cynthia Johnson appeared, wiping her hands on a bit of cloth. Doreen came straight to the point. "I'm leaving," she said, "and I need a horse and some supplies." "Where will you go?" "Fort Worth. I'll also be needing directions." For a moment Cynthia fell silent. Doreen's decision seemed to be exactly what she had been hoping for. Even so, Cynthia understood the rigors of cross-country travel. "Ma'am, I don't want to be rude, but it's over 200 miles to Fort Worth. Pretty near as far as Abilene. Why don't you go on over to Fort Gibson? Ain't but 4 or 5 days' ride." "No, I'm going to Fort Worth. I need a horse and supplies," she repeated. "We can give you a few things and a mule, but we can't spare anyone to guide you." "I can travel alone. Just give me directions and I'll be on my way. I would prefer to leave early tomorrow." Cynthia, savoring the notion that her family might be rid of this troublesome stranger, nodded unconsciously. "Then it's settled?" Doreen asked. "I need to talk with Cecil." "Well, remind him what I said about our situation." "He doesn't need to be reminded of that, ma'am." "No, I wouldn't think he would." As Doreen left, Cynthia thought about her husband. Cecil would have reservations about sending Doreen alone across 200 miles of open country. Her husband spoke often of doing the right thing, even when the thing in question might be a terrible burden. Would Cecil allow the white woman to simply leave without a guide? As Cynthia considered things, notions of right and wrong jumbled in her mind. Doreen presented a clear danger. Cynthia knew it would be foolish to overlook the opportunity to be rid of the white woman. She also knew that Cecil, aware of the risks, might balk at the notion of Doreen traveling alone. He might even decide to escort her himself, a thought that filled Cynthia with dread. What if the woman became angry on the trail and blurted out her threats to a passing stranger? Cecil might never return. Sending Mr. Sugars would expose their hired man to the same risk. Continuing her chores, Cynthia brooded over the subject. Then, after 2 hours of deliberation, decided she would help Doreen without telling her husband. She finished her gardening and started for the tool shed. To assist Doreen's departure without Cecil's knowledge, she would have to get her husband away from home for a few hours. Helona, their neighbor, had recently asked for help repairing a wagon wheel. Cynthia would tell her husband that Helona needed the work done soon. When Cecil returned from Helona's place, Doreen would be gone. Cynthia entered the barn and gave the door to Mr. Sugar's room a rap. "Who is it?" "It's Mrs. Johnson, ma'am. I thought about what you said. I reckon I'd be willing to help." Cynthia heard the latch rattle. Doreen appeared, looking as if she had just risen, even though it was well after noon. "My husband won't approve of you leaving," Cynthia continued. "We'll be needing to keep this a secret, and he's likely to come after you." "Why would he care if I left?" I would think you would be glad. He might figure you could be hurt or even killed on the trail. He ain't the kind to allow a lady to face such a trial alone." For a moment, as if Cynthia's words raised a question in her mind, Doreen paused. She knew that traveling alone in Indian territory might be hazardous. Even so, she couldn't possibly remain sleeping in the Johnsons' shed, bored and simultaneously terrified of the lurking stranger, Henry Walker. "We don't have to tell him," Doreen said. Cynthia shifted uneasily. "You understand this here is wild country and ain't everybody friendly and civilized as the Muskogee. You might come on some bad folks. There's some Comanche run through here some, or you could get yourself bitten by a critter. You understand, right?" Doreen's sense of pride engaged once more. How dare this colored woman suggest she might not understand the dangers of the trail? "I'm not an idiot. If you're not going to help me, just say so. I'm leaving either way." "No, ma'am, I want to help. It's just Cecil. Well, he's never mind. I'll fix you up with a mule and some supplies." Cynthia lowered her eyes. If the woman wanted to go, she wouldn't stop her. Good riddance. "We'll fix things up so you can leave tomorrow morning." When Cecil returned from Jake McQueen's late that afternoon, he busied himself with a few chores. Cynthia had snared a pair of cottontails, and with some of her garden vegetables and sage from the pasture, had prepared a thick stew. She also made flatbread fried in bacon grease, sprinkled with cinnamon and sugar, a treat the children devoured hungrily. Cecil complimented Cynthia on the meal, and as the day waned, settled in his chair beneath the hackberry tree to enjoy an evening smoke. An hour later, with the children in bed, Cynthia joined Cecil. As they sat side by side, just as they did most evenings, she mentioned Helona. "She needs that wagon fixed soon as we can manage it. She promised us 2 quilts for the work." Just as she knew he would, Cecil nodded. "I'll ride over in the morning. Maybe I can rustle up Henry to help." A few minutes later they retired to their single-room house, nestling in on each side of the children in the bed where they all slept. There in the darkness, listening to her husband's light snore and the deep breathing of her children, Cynthia struggled with her decision to lie. After an hour, unable to sleep, she eased from the bed and walked quietly around the partition and pulled a chair against one wall. Climbing onto the chair, she reached for something on a high shelf. Her mother, before she died, had given her a wooden figurine and had told Cynthia the tribal fetish had traveled the ocean on a boat with her great-great-grandmother. "This be Missy." Her mother, dying of lung sickness, had whispered the words as she placed the wooden carving in Cynthia's hand. "Your great-great-granny hid this doll. This here doll. She hid it from the white man for near 4 months, way across the wide ocean." Cynthia didn't see the figurine as a toy, even though her mother called it a doll. The polished wooden carving glowed from the oils of ancient hands and felt like a primordial receptacle for her family's history, a place where her mother and every mother before her lived on, imbued into the surface of the breasts and round rump of the tribal mannequin. "Your granny would rub this doll for hours. Achbi, she called it. Spoke to it like it was a person. She told me this here be spiritual. This here is power, more than any of the white man's gods. Huckabee could take up and destroy the white man if she had notion to."
Her mother placed the figurine into Cynthia's hand, squeezing her fingers tightly around the carving, humming an ancient tune. This be yours now. Don't never let Ichabod die. A week later, her mother passed calmly in her sleep. When Cynthia felt uncertain or worried, the carving gave her comfort, a sense of belonging to something other than the world of white men. Still, she had no illusions about the doll's power. It could neither prevent Doreen from lying, nor could it defend them if men came to destroy her family in response to those lies. Sitting in the nearly pitch-dark interior of their home, Cynthia rubbed the mannequin and drew comfort from the notion that a place exists where people of color live freely on their own. She drew strength from the notion that her people had created gods of their own, and the realization that in another place, far across the ocean, a woman like Doreen Tarwater would be as weak and helpless as Cynthia had felt so many times in the past. She returned to bed, Ichabod in her hand, but slept fitfully. When the faint rays of daybreak painted the eastern horizon crimson, she started a fire in the stove, then slipped out the door. The previous evening she had gathered some food and a few other supplies into a burlap bag. Cecil would be rising soon. She had also corralled cotton socks the night before, luring the gentle Henny with a bucket of sweet oats. Cecil had surely noticed the animal in the corral, but hadn't asked why. If he did, Cynthia had her lie prepared. She would tell her husband she planned to ride over to a friend's home to trade some gingham fabric for a pair of gardening shears. Gathering the burlap bag, Cynthia slipped out the door and hurried to the barn. "What do you want? I'm sleeping," Doreen called out in response to Cynthia's sharp rap. "You need to get ready to go." "I didn't plan to leave this early." "Yes, ma'am. Thing is, Cecil will be off to work shortly. Soon as he goes, you need to get on your way. You need to get ahead of him a good bit, or else he's likely to follow. Chances he'd bring you right on back here if he could catch up with you." Doreen pulled herself up and opened the door. Another restless night and the realization she would be completely alone on the trail had weighed upon her. Tossing in Mr. Sugar's bed, she had heard noises outside and had grown nervous about her decision to leave unaccompanied. "I may require your husband to accompany me to Fort Worth," Doreen said. Cynthia, frustrated but not surprised, said, "No, I can't allow my Cecil can't go with you to Fort Worth." "Allow it? It isn't a matter of you allowing anything. If I say your husband is to accompany me to Fort Worth, then that is exactly what will happen." No, it ain't. Don't forget where you are." "I believe I'll just wait and discuss this with your husband when he returns." "No, you will not." Cynthia had already considered what she might do if this happened. She thrust a finger into Doreen's chest. "You got two choices. You either get on that mule and leave when my Cecil goes, or you stay right here in a hole in the ground." Cynthia wasn't certain she could kill Doreen, but wouldn't endanger her family any longer. It's a simple question. Doreen, angered by Cynthia's insolence, grabbed her broom from the bedside. A moment later, Cynthia had a hand on the broom as well, and soon they were moving back and forth in the narrow confines of the room, tussling over the stick. Cynthia, the stronger of the pair, pulled Doreen, still clinging to the broom, through the doorway and out into the area between the house and the corrals. With a clear advantage, the work-hardened frontier woman pinned Doreen against the stone wall of the milking shed. She was just about to repeat her ultimatum when suddenly a shadowy figure appeared. With a sweep of a powerful arm, the women tumbled in opposite directions, leaving Henry Walker standing between them, holding the broom. Doreen, who fell, stifled a scream and crab-walked into the corner of the stall. Meanwhile, Henry, who had merely wanted to end the fight, shuffled nervously, mumbling apologies. I'm sorry. Sure enough, I was just... What are you doing here, Henry? Cynthia snatched the broom. Cactus Branch, now in panic mode, stuttered. How could he explain that he had come to peer through a crack in the window at the white woman? Calm down, Henry, Cynthia said. Take a breath and tell me what you're doing here. Henry paused, then said, I come to see if Cecil gonna need help with that lumber coming the wagon day before yesterday. You were outside last night, weren't you? Doreen crawled to her feet and moved closer to Cynthia, seeking protection from the woman she had just been fighting with moments earlier. Meanwhile, Cynthia, seeing the look of terror in Doreen's eyes, sensed an advantage and took a step forward, defending Doreen. Was you creeping round last night? She asked. Henry cowered noticeably, and Cynthia had her answer. No, I did. Henry's voice trailed off. How could he respond? He had been outside the shed most of the night. At that moment, 50 yards away, Cecil emerged from the house. Cynthia, realizing her plans were in jeopardy, said, Henry, go on over and talk with Cecil. He's going to Miss Alona's to work on her wagon and needs your help. You go on and sit with him for a minute, and we'll get you some breakfast. Cactus Branch scurried away, relieved to escape the uneasy situation. Cynthia watched as her husband seated himself in his chair beneath the hackberry to put on his boots as he did every morning. Cecil would expect breakfast soon. She had to act quickly. Watching Doreen, whose horrified gaze followed the deformed figure of Henry Walker, an idea occurred to her. That there is Cactus Branch. He's touched in the head 'cause of bad treatment from white folks. Cynthia observed the effect of her words on Doreen. Word is, now, this is just hearsay, mind you, but folks say Henry done killed 2 white women in Mississippi before he came to Indian Territory. I ain't saying there's no truth to it, but I have to leave, Doreen said. Ma'am, Cecil can't take you out of here now. He's been gone for near a month already. This time of year there ain't no end to the work. If you must have an escort, it's gonna be a few weeks. I can't wait. I can't. It's not possible. Doreen's lower lip quivered and a tear rolled down her cheek. If Henry's got his eye on you, then I reckon that's true. No telling what he might do. The native folks calls him Cactus Branch 'cause he's twisted up like one of them spiny cactus. I see the way he looks at you. This is a mighty hard spot. I can't stay here, Doreen repeated. Don't you understand? I can't stay. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Everything is ready. I got the mule all pinned up and ready, and I got some food and a few things sacked up. We just need to wait till Cecil leaves. Gathering herself, Doreen edged back toward the barn, her thoughts in turmoil. I'll be ready, she said, then stepped back inside, slamming the door behind her. Chapter 19. 2 Prayers. Cecil watched as Henry Walker approached,
Like most residents of their small community, Cecil appreciated Walker's talents as a carpenter. Still, Henry wasn't an easy man to talk to. Cecil stood, released a puff of smoke from his pipe, and extended his left hand out of deference to Henry's malformed right hand. "Morning, Henry. Glad you're here. I was planning to stop by your place. I could use some help over at Miss Helona's." I saw that pile of lumber you come in with. I reckon how you was building a new room. Those boards look mighty fine." "Pay is 25 cents for the work on the house. I know it ain't much, but Cynthia will feed you 3 meals a day on top of that. I plan to build right over in that direction at the west end. We've been crowded up in one room too long. I'd be looking to build a pair of beds for the children. Think you would help with something like that?" "Yes, I could build you whatever you need. I even got me a table I rigged up for turning posts and such. I can make a right pretty bedpost." "That would be fine. I didn't buy any framing lumber in Kansas City, just boards for the exterior walls. I figured to fell trees and frame it up with peeled logs. I bought a good many nails." Henry peered over his shoulder at the barn. Cecil had seen Henry with the women a few minutes earlier. Why had he been hovering around the barn? Had Henry noticed the arrival of the white woman? "We'll be having you for breakfast?" Cecil motioned for Henry to sit. "Let's just relax here while Cynthia cooks up the bacon and such. Did you bring your tools? I don't think I have ever seen you without them." I left them at home." Henry's normally bowed head dipped lower. "My shoulder been hurting me something fierce lately. Won't take me more than a minute to put them in your wagon." "We can do that." Now Cecil knew for sure Henry was hiding something. The man never left home without his tools. Cecil realized what was happening a few seconds later when Henry glanced once again toward the shed. "That white woman is a world of trouble," Cecil said. I ain't hardly noticed her." Cynthia passed, returning from whatever she had been discussing with Doreen. Cecil had noticed Cynthia's henny cotton socks earlier. Was his wife planning to go somewhere? Looking at the gentle animal, another thought occurred to Cecil, one he quickly dismissed. Was it possible that Cynthia was arranging for Doreen's departure? Why would Cynthia hide such a plan? Breakfast arrived a few minutes later. Eggs, bacon, and Cynthia's homemade biscuits. The food was good, and there was little conversation. As everyone was finishing up, Cynthia went inside and returned with a plate for Doreen. "Take this on out there to the royalty," she said. Cecil nodded, taking the plate. Then he looked once more at Cotton Socks. Cynthia saw the look but said nothing. Cecil considered asking about the henny, but decided against it. Henry followed Cecil to the barn. As they approached, the mule rancher could see Doreen peering nervously through a crack in the barn door. "Leave me alone," Doreen said. "I need to get some oats for the wagon team. Here's your breakfast. Go on back into your room and we won't bother you none." Cecil spoke the words lightly, hoping to avoid conflict. "Mighty good food this morning," he added. "You may come in, but he has to stay outside." Cecil inched through the door, placing the plate on one of the benches, then filled a bucket with grain. He started to tell Doreen she needn't fear Henry, but didn't want to prolong things. When he stepped back outside, Doreen slammed the door behind him.
They continued around the corral to the west pasture, where Cecil began tapping a stick against the oat can, clicking his tongue, calling the mule team. As he did so, he turned once more to Henry. "That woman seems a bit scared of you, Henry." "Yeah, is my shoulder, and you are a good-sized man, but you shouldn't take it personal like. That woman is flighty. Folks like her ain't bad exactly, but most of them are bred with notions about black folks. They don't think of us as folks, more like mules or some such. You understand?" "She be my angel," Henry mumbled, as he often did, and the crippled man's slurred speech made him hard to understand. "Now, what?" Cecil chuckled. "It sounded like you said she was your angel." Henry raised his head. "Yes, sir. That's what I done said. She be my angel." Cecil paused, then said, "She's pretty, but she ain't no angel, Henry. Far from it." I prayed on it. My auntie told me long ago about how folks have an angel. I think that gal there be mine. I know it sounds a mite bit foolish." "Henry, I don't think angels appear like—" "You're right," Henry said. "You're sure enough right. Oh, Henry, he has some funny ideas, sure enough. Just crazy old Henry." "I didn't mean to make it sound like—" "You ain't got to worry none about stupid old Henry." Cactus Branch ducked his head. Was the man angry? It wasn't the first time a conversation with Henry felt odd, but Cecil had never seen Henry angry before. He resumed tapping the can, and a minute or so later a pair of mules approached. The animals knew that by accepting Cecil's grain they faced a day of work. They weren't lazy, but neither were they quick to give up time spent grazing on the newly sprouted grass. Their willingness to come at all, Cecil knew, had more to do with the symbiosis between man and equine than an offering of the oats. Mules, like all domesticated animals, develop affection or dislike for their owners. As Cecil turned, leading the draft animal toward the corral, he wondered if his team, like house cats who view themselves as the masters of a home, saw Cecil as the surrogate in their relationship. Hitching the team, Cecil dared not mention Doreen Tarwater again. The silence between the men extended to the road, and through the morning, exchanges limited to discussion of the repairs needed to fix Miss Helona's wagon. After lunch on the return trip, they stopped at Henry's neatly framed two-room cabin. As Cactus Branch gathered a few things, he looked several times in the direction of Cecil's place. Cecil felt he couldn't avoid the topic of Doreen any longer. "She ain't no good," Cecil said, watching Henry's reaction. "I prayed, and he done Henry's speech dissolved into mumbling, then silence. The early afternoon sun cast a harsh glare, and the chirring of grasshoppers provided oppressive accompaniment to Cactus Branch's response. Cecil had his answer. Clearly, Henry had imbued Doreen with some odd spiritual significance. With a sigh, Cecil set the brake and dismounted. He placed a hand on Henry's shoulder. "You say you prayed for this woman?" Cecil couldn't help but recall Jake's story about ghosts appearing, bearing portents of great harm. There were many stories in the Bible that stretched the imagination. Though it seemed ridiculous, the entire situation with Doreen had Cecil searching for answers. Was it possible that Doreen had appeared to teach him or Henry an important lesson? I done prayed on her many a year," Henry repeated. Cecil felt a chill down his spine, his mind ticking through the events of the last 2 weeks. Henry's obsession with Doreen seemed like more evidence, supporting the notion that some great power was guiding things. "What makes you think this woman is your angel?" he asked. Henry paused, then said, "I seen the white woman there in the wagon when y'all come in 2 days ago." Henry straightened, looking at Cecil now. "I followed y'all. When night come on, I eased down to y'all's barn. Was mighty dark, clouds overhead and such, and she came out to me. She saw me there, seen how I was standing there looking her way, and she called to me. I asked her if she was my angel, and she said she was. She said she was my angel, just like that. Then she told me to come closer, and even closer still, and when I was right up next to her, she took my John Henry in her hand right there, and I done felt the power of the Lord." In other circumstances, Cecil might have laughed, but the way Henry described the event stopped him. Doreen Tarwater had complicated their life enormously. Now, his deeply troubled neighbor had engaged in an unexplainable sexual encounter with Doreen and seemed convinced that Doreen had been sent by God. "Henry, I don't think this gal is—" "Don't doubt me. She is. She must be my angel. Must be my angel." The look of anguish in Henry's eyes spoke of the troubled former slave's inner turmoil. For a moment, Cecil felt such empathy for the troubled man. He wanted to wrap Henry in his arms to soothe his anguish somehow. But when he placed a hand on Henry's shoulder, the man shrugged it off. "I need an angel," he said. "I need one good thing, just one blessing to calm me some. I ain't got no calm place inside." Cecil felt profoundly uneasy now. He wanted to respond in some way, but the situation baffled him. He hoisted himself back onto the buckboard and waited. There had always been a question of Henry's mental well-being. After several seconds, Henry stepped up and settled next to him. Cecil gave a click of his tongue and turned the wagon for home. 15 minutes later, rolling up the slight incline to the house, Cecil saw Cynthia in the garden. His wife had surely seen them coming, but didn't look up. He turned his attention to the corral, hoping his suspicions about Doreen were wrong, but Cotton Socks was gone. Cecil continued to the barn, set the brake, told Henry he might be right back, and went inside. Glancing in Mr. Sugar's room, he saw that Doreen's belongings were also gone. Had Cynthia lied to him? Back outside, he looked in Cynthia's direction. Now she was looking at him, and something, her body language perhaps, told him to wait, to save his questions for later. Cecil, adrift in his emotions, told Henry to begin his measurements for the new room. He went about his normal chores. There was too much work to simply stand around worrying. An hour passed before Henry said he needed a shovel and left for the barn. Cecil watched as Cactus Branch stood uneasily outside the barn for nearly a minute before entering. A few seconds after entering, Henry emerged without the shovel. He walked silently back to where he had been working and spent a few minutes arranging his tools, first placing his ladder and a pair of crosscut saws into a neat pile near the corner of the house. Henry then stored his smaller implements into his toolbox and hoisted the container onto his good shoulder. Then the disfigured giant simply left, walking in the direction of his house. Cecil started to speak. started to ask Henry where he was going. Instead, he just watched and then continued his chores. Henry would be back the next morning, or if he failed to arrive, Cecil would check on him. Something had changed in Cecil's heart regarding Henry. Somehow the man seemed more human now. Cecil had never stopped to consider that Henry might need human companionship. Perhaps he needed to make a greater effort to be a friend. Later that afternoon, with the sun waning and many chores left for tomorrow, Cecil saddled one of the mules and told Cynthia he was going to round up strays. He circled the farmhouse until he came upon a set of hoof prints traveling south. He identified the tracks easily from the slightly deeper depression made by Cotton Sock's right hind leg. He rode back to the house, and as the sun disappeared, he rinsed his face, neck, and arms in the stock tank. Cynthia sat outside with the children, all waiting for his return and dinner. They had their meal by the light of 2 lanterns, a luxury of lamp oil. They ate venison from the smokehouse with potatoes and greens from the garden. The children dashed around, playing with the baby until the infant grew fussy. Cecil sat in his chair, smoking, as Cynthia washed the plates in a tub near the porch. Eventually, finished with her cleaning, Cynthia herded the little ones indoor. There were a few mild cajolements and a gentle lullaby, only faintly audible through the cabin door. Finally, Cynthia emerged to sit by her husband's side beneath the hackberry. "I seen that white woman left," Cecil said after a time. For a long moment, Cynthia remained silent, then said, "I helped her go." "Should I get on after her?" Cecil asked. He felt confused and, more than anything, worried. Why hadn't Cynthia trusted him with her plan? "No, Cecil, leave her be. Please, baby, just leave that woman be." Cynthia's words were a plea and, in a subtle way, a warning. He started to respond, started to speak of the right thing and God's all-seeing nature, but then he stopped himself. So many confusing events, all of them related to the white woman. He realized Cynthia was probably right. Why should he go after Doreen Tarwater? The woman had come sowing turmoil. If the Lord speaks to a man in his heart through his emotions or instincts, what was God saying except that Cecil should remain there with his family? For Cecil's part, he only wanted his family's safety. As he let go of the notion of following Doreen, he told himself that a colored man in a white man's world can only do so much. Then he said a silent prayer, thanking Jesus he wouldn't have to kill Doreen. Chapter 20, Cottonmouth and the Pathfinder's Dream. "You have a crowd outside the gate." Matt seated himself opposite Major A.J. Alexander, referring to the community of Plains Indians, mostly women and children, camped alongside the sod outworks of Fort Union. "They remain in their place or else," Alexander said. "It is our policy to summarily try and hang the younger men if they act up. Grab that chair over yonder." Alexander motioned Brant to pull a second chair from its resting spot against the southern wall. "Well, I reckon you men are the experts." Matt raised an eyebrow. "You may disapprove of my policy if you like. There are senators in Washington who quibble about it. Not my problem. Relations with these tribal folk are difficult. Our commission, however, is simple. We are here to keep the Santa Fe Trail safe for travelers.
If you must know, we've hung only one man in the past 2 years. I won't speak of his actions, but they were heinous. Now, what is your business?" "I like a man who gets right to it," Matt said. "We're looking for a colored man driving a herd of mules. He may have an older black gentleman with him and possibly 2 or 3 children."
"Ain't seen him."
"We feel fairly certain he came through this way."
"If I say I ain't seen him, I ain't seen him."
"Yes, I understand," Matt said. "Thing is that the man we're seeking may have killed a white woman. Cecil Johnson is his name. He was stationed here about 5 years ago."
"Don't recall the name."
"We thought he might have come this way, perhaps looking for an old friend, one of your colored troops, perhaps. The woman is the daughter of a wealthy man in Kansas. I understand the father has some political connections, so it is a serious matter." Alexander pursed his lips, then waved his hand for Matt to continue. "It's a curious story," Matt went on. "Seems this white woman, Doreen Tarwater, ran off or was forcibly kidnapped one morning in Abilene, Kansas. Personally, I believe she ran off. At any rate, we have evidence suggesting Miss Tarwater was at the Johnson homestead in Indian Territory for a few days near the end of April. We haven't been that way yet, but we have reliable word that Johnson was seen near your fort recently. It's important that we talk with him."
"As I say, I ain't seen the man. However, we do have a few colored soldiers stationed here, mostly berthed over in the North Barracks. You might speak with our Smithy, Cottonmouth. He was here 5 years ago. He can be found in the shed alongside the foundry. Gentlemen, I simply cannot help you with this matter."
"Yes, sir, I understand, but—"
"Lieutenant Mathers, would you see these men out?"
Alexander stood, signaling an end to the interview. Matt nodded amicably and stood. A bookish young officer appeared in the doorway. "Thank you, Major. I know the young woman's father will be thankful when he hears of your cooperation."
"I don't give a damn if he's thankful or not."
Alexander motioned them towards the door.
"Good day."
The lieutenant led them outside, and once there pointed towards the foundry. "Smithy is most likely out for lunch. He starts early and generally has a siesta before resuming his 4 or 5. Difficult man. Some might say downright unpleasant. He ain't gonna appreciate you bothering him. I recommend you settle in for a while and wait for him to come out." Matt nodded and thanked the lieutenant. A half-minute later, they stood outside a solid wood-frame structure next to the foundry, the smells of sulfur and heated iron assailing their nostrils. The blacksmith was nowhere to be seen. Matt considered the lieutenant's warning, then gave the blacksmith's door a rap. There was no response. "Maybe he's not in." Brant felt uncertain about the situation. Blacksmiths were often men of exacting standards, proud of their trade and powerfully built because of the nature of their work. "I'll just give it one more try." Matt knocked louder.
"Who the hell is it?"
The door swung open and a towering man with a bull's chest, jet black skin, a shaved head, and an enormous white cloud of a beard appeared.
"Don't you know it's lunchtime?"
The man scowled with such intensity both Matt and Brent took a step backwards. "Howdy," Matt stuttered. The blacksmith dwarfed even Brent.
"What the hell do you want? Can't a man get no peace around here?
If you need some horses shod or liveried, I'll be back in the foundry around 1600 hours.
No, sir, we came to talk. Just a couple of questions.
Sir? You calling me sir? Well, I'll be damned if it ain't a polite white man. God damn, I might just about shit my britches on that one. Ain't none of y'all white sons of bitches call me sir, and are you touched in the head, boy?
Cottonmouth's scowl deepened. Brent wondered if they might be better off leaving, but Matt, always up for a challenge, raised an eyebrow and grinned. I reckon I'm a bit touched, but I need to ask you a few questions. If I can pull you away from your lunch for a few minutes?
Oh, master, you don't have to be bright old Cottonmouth. Let me step over here and fetch my things. I'll be right along at 1600 hours.
Despite his denial, Matt could see a wrinkle of amusement around the smithy's eyes. We don't want to inconvenience you. I promise this won't take more than a moment.
Ain't no way a fine white fella like you could, what was that word, inconvenience me? Danged if you white fellas don't use big words.
This is Hunter Brantley, and I'm Matt Grayson. This will only take a second. Cottonmouth clicked his tongue, then took a step back.
Fine. I was about to sit down for cookies and tea. Reckon you boys might just as well come on in and join me.
Brent looked at Matt and Matt at Brent. Tea and cookies? Matt asked.
That's right. Come on in.
Cottonmouth waved them inside. Matt looked at Brent a second time, then shrugged, and both men entered the blacksmith's shack. Judging from the building's exterior, Brent expected the interior to be Spartan, but was surprised to find the place well furnished with a bed, small cook stove, several shelves stocked with a variety of canned goods, linens, books, glassware, a camera, a carved chess set, a miniature train, and even a microscope. Cottonmouth directed them to sit around a small table and a moment later placed a teacup in front of each of them. From a tin he spooned tea and a moment later poured water from a steaming kettle into each cup. Finally, Cottonmouth placed a small tin of cookies in the middle of the table. Matt and Brent looked at the setting in stunned silence.
What's the matter? You dumb crackers ain't never seen a cracker before?
Cottonmouth grinned mischievously. The men sat silently at first, baffled by the formal setting. Matt recovered quickly, however. Major Alexander said you might have known Cecil Johnson.
I knew him, Cottonmouth said. What did Mr. Starchy Britches say?
Well,
The man thinks he knows every goddamn thing. You should have seen the time I told him to shoe his own damn horse.
Cottonmouth chuckled.
He came up to me shouting about how his mount went lame and wasn't shod proper. He rode his patrol 2 days straight chasing after a bunch of Kiowa they ain't caught yet. I told him if it weren't for my shoes he would have been walking and the horse would have been dead, which is true. Alexander ain't exactly what you would call petite.
What did he do? Brent asked.
He didn't do a damn thing. The man knew I was right. Thought the pompous bastard was gonna strip me down and whip me, but he just got all red in the face and stomped off. Major Alexander may be a little too starchy, but he ain't no fool.
He certainly got right to business when we were in his office, Matt said. So, about Cecil Johnson,
I know why you're here. You think I invite every scraggly cowpuncher in here for cookies and tea? I was expecting you. Cecil has been here. He told me there might be men coming through asking after him. Told me the whole story. I reckon you fellers plan on taking Cecil back to face up to the father of that trashy white woman stowed off in his wagon. Well, I tell you right now, Cecil ain't the kind to harm a white woman nor anyone. Far as Cecil knows, she's still alive, though that may have changed by now. From what Cecil says, she was a fool.
Matt looked at the grizzled blacksmith, examining him for any signs of a lie. Despite Matt's unassuming charm, he could read a man more accurately than most. When Matt nodded, Brent understood that his partner believed Cottonmouth's story. Unfortunately, the smithy's words only complicated matters. "We were hired to find Johnson." Matt eyed the enormous blacksmith cautiously.
"I know that, but I don't aim to tell you which direction he went. Johnson saved the lives of 12 men a few years back. Ain't a soldier, black or white, in these parts will say a word against him. 8 of the men Cecil saved were white."
"What if I said I believe you? What if I said I would do my dead level best to make certain the whole business gets cleared up and Cecil Johnson gets his name cleared fair and square?"
"Ain't no fair and square where a black man comes up against a white woman. Ain't nothing but a good man dangling from a rope. By the way, just so you understand the situation, I got word you were coming from Major Alexander himself. Our scouts spotted y'all riding in early this morning. There are orders not to speak with you on this matter. I'm merely paying you a courtesy because you look like decent men, but you best leave this be."
The last sentence stopped Matt. There was no threat in Cottonmouth's words, but the fact that Major Alexander had known about Johnson and had feigned ignorance said volumes about the situation. "Alexander pulled the wool over our eyes?" It was more a statement than a question.
"You ain't heard it from me."
Cottonmouth sighed, then said,
"I will say this much, just so you know. Cecil Johnson came through here without his wife, and only 2 of his 3 children. You understand me? The man lost his wife and baby child to this deal. The ones done it won't never pay, neither."
Matt regarded Cottonmouth for a long moment. "So you say Johnson's wife wasn't with him?"
"Nor his infant child."
Matt nodded, took a deep breath, and turned to Brent. "We should hit the trail. Is there anything else you can tell us?"
"There are things a man must do, things that can't be left undone. I served with Johnson, and he ain't the kind to leave things undone. You got no right to find these folks you're following, none of them, not a one."
Cottonmouth looked menacingly at Matt and Brent.
"Leave this thing be."
Cottonmouth stood, dismissing them, just as Major Alexander had earlier. As they left Cottonmouth's quarters, it now felt like they were being scrutinized from all directions. The glances and stares that had seemed mere curiosity earlier had taken on a vaguely threatening tone. "Johnson has friends here." Brent tightened the cinch on his saddle. "You reckon the smithy's right about him being innocent of this business?" "He's right," Matt replied. "Unfortunately, that doesn't change our situation. If we take him in, Johnson will hang. I didn't think you were the kind to send an innocent man to the gallows." "I'm not, Hunter. That's the problem. But we're not the only ones looking." They attempted to replenish their supplies from the fort's commissary, but the quartermaster refused. "Ain't none of these forts on this trail gonna take care of you boys," he said. "Orders from Major Alexander. We don't serve low-down bounty-hunting scum." As they rode out, Brant calculated they had, at best, a week's worth of supplies. He also knew Matt wouldn't be willing to slow down for hunting. "Hungry days ahead," he said. "What's that?" "Nothing." They continued west for another 3 days, hoping to catch Johnson, their food supplies dwindling to scraps. Thanks to the Transcontinental Railroad, completed a few years earlier, the string of wagons that once populated the Santa Fe Trail had dwindled considerably. On the afternoon of the third day, Matt reined to a stop. "We're on the wrong track," he said. "I don't believe Cecil Johnson came this way. I haven't seen any mule tracks since we left Fort Union." "I don't recall anyone at the fort saying anything about Johnson traveling this way." "You may recall how that clerk at the store mentioned how we wouldn't get any help at the other forts along the trail." Matt looked at his partner, reminding him of the lieutenant's warning. "We've been traveling 3 days on that." "Well, at least I was going on something." "You had an idea Johnson might not have come this way back at Fort Union, didn't you?" Brent felt his anger rise. "Why the hell didn't you say something 100 miles back?" "I wasn't sure." Brent dismounted, glaring at his partner. "Get off the horse and make camp." Brent struggled to contain his anger. "We're out of grub. Were you planning on not eating for the next week?" "Hunter, Shut up, Matt. I'm sick of this. You never listen to anyone but your own damn self, and I'm supposed to just follow along whenever the hell you decide to take us. Get your ass off that horse before I drag you and hog-tie you to a cactus. I'm going hunting, and you damn well better have the tents up and fire going when I get back, or I swear I'm going to give you a butt-whipping you will not forget. God damn it, Matt." "Hunter, there's snow. Call it." "Shut up." Brent spent the rest of the afternoon following a small herd of buffalo. Finally, around nightfall, he brought down an old cow trailing the herd. He butchered the carcass by moonlight, removing the flanks and hump, loading his stout pony with nearly 70 pounds of meat. He hated to leave the remains, but figured the animal, having strayed from its herd, would have died soon anyway. Back at camp, Matt, as ordered, had pitched their tents, and in anticipation of a successful hunt, had gathered enough wood for a decent fire. When Brent arrived, Matt arranged chunks of buffalo to smoke through the night. They tethered the mules near the fire to keep the coyotes away. The following morning, they reversed trail for Fort Union. They didn't bother entering the fort when they arrived 3 days later. A group of cavalrymen spotted them and shouted a few choice words. Matt and Brent didn't bother responding. Trying to explain their true intentions was a waste of time. That afternoon, ominous storm clouds gathered in the north. They stopped and pitched a single tent beneath a rocky outcropping in the lee of a mesa. It began to rain. Soon, a late spring norther had blown in and the temperature dropped. Even though they had been traveling in 80-degree heat most days, the temperature dropped to near freezing and the rain became icy sleet. Because they had not gathered firewood, they huddled on their cots, wrapped in blankets, shivering in the gloom. Brant, who carried a couple of books on the trail, tried to distract himself with The Deer Slayer, to no avail. To make matters worse, other than the already spoiling buffalo meat, they had nothing to eat. "Good buck, but we ain't got fuel for the lamp." Brent reluctantly closed the novel and burrowed into his knapsack. They had less than a pint of kerosene left. On the trail, one never knew when a lamp or other piece of equipment might become essential. Brent, gazing forlornly through the tent flaps,
didn't notice that a craving for whiskey never came. The morning dawned with horizontal rain and howling winds that threatened to take their tent. Brent ventured outside and rigged the second tent as a windbreak for the animals. He also managed to gather a bit of firewood for the tent stove. It was approaching noon when he crawled back inside, soaking wet and shivering. Matt, who had spent his morning writing letters on a small lap desk, didn't seem to notice. Instead, with Brent now there as audience, he started babbling about the case. Eventually night fell and they turned in for a second day. The third morning dawned with teeth-chattering cold, hunger, and mind-numbing boredom. Fortunately, the skies cleared shortly after noon. Matt suggested breaking camp, but Brent said 2 hours on the trail wouldn't amount to much. Instead, he gathered every buffalo chip and mesquite branch he could find and built a big smoky fire outside to dry everything out. As the late sun colored the sparsely clouded skies orange, conversation turned to their next destination. "Johnson could be halfway to California by now," Matt said. "We could ride west, but we only have 1 can of beans and that rancid buffalo meat. We might be able to get a few things in San Luis, but just as likely the Army folks will have word up that way too. We could take the North Trail up to Colorado City. I got no idea what's up that way, though. Pretty sparse territory when we were through there, 5 years ago? We could go on up to Denver and get the railroad, but once we got to California, what then? Kiowa through there, so they aren't always pleasant. Maybe we're better off going back. We can be in Lower Spring in 4 days. They'll sell us grub there. I know old man Turner. He won't turn us down." Matt paused, then released a long gust of air. "I guess after that we can just head on back for Abilene. I'll tell Mr. Tarwater what we know. The advance money is non-refundable by our contract. I hate to quit, but I think Johnson is probably long gone. That's too much country to cover unless Mr. Tarwater wants to give us more for supplies." In the darkness, his back aching from the confines of the tent, Brent thought about Natty Bumppo and imagined himself leading a group of people through the wilderness, trekking through lands filled with threatening savages, seeing places never seen by white men. He examined the woven charm given him by Nakona, and at some point found himself in a place between wakefulness and dreams. Visions of the past lurched through his mind, his father stumbling to the barn, his little brother running towards him proudly displaying a rabbit he had just shot. In his old kitchen, his mother, wiry and hard as a walking stick, moved busily, preparing a meal. "Get out there to the field, boy. Tell your daddy to come on in for supper." Brent could hear her words as clearly as the day they were spoken. "Yes, Mama." He ran out the front door, around the barn, and down the long slope to the creek. Passing the trees lining the banks, he leapt up the embankment, slipping a little, grinding mud into the knees of his old jeans, something his mother would scold him about later. Breathing hard, he pushed himself up the slope, headed for the tilled fields where his father was plowing. Topping the rise, he saw the mule, reins hanging from the back of the plow, the animal still hitched, head hanging low. He didn't yet notice his father's lifeless form, half hidden by a freshly turned furrow. Then in his dream, Brant's location shifted. Replacing the plowed field, he saw the red escarpments of Quanah's Canyon. A mountain lion approached. "Look, there," the beast said. In the distance, Brant saw a campsite, 4 figures huddled around a flickering fire, a boy hammering at the mud with a stick, a girl clutching desperately at a doll, an older fellow with white hair and kind eyes singing, and a 4th man, A man he somehow knew was Cecil Johnson, staring blankly at the setting sun. The surroundings blurred, time shifted, and Brant found himself atop a windy promontory. Below, a forest of pine, hardwoods, and evergreens stretched in all directions. The kindly gray-haired man sat with the 2 children aboard a wagon. Johnson handed him a sack of coins, then rode away. In the drizzling mist of Brant's dream, time and distance flew by. He found himself in hill country, ravines thick with oak brush, sprawling stands of deciduous trees, and marshy lowlands filled with switchgrass and cattails. Cecil Johnson, nearly invisible, hid beneath an incongruous stand of juniper trees, fearful, waiting for something or someone to pass. Morning arrived, the cloudless skies purple, then orange, then pure blue. Matt shifted in response to Brant, who was already up packing their gear. "I have an idea where we can find Cecil Johnson," Brant said. "What?" Matt pulled his blanket over his head, hoping for another moment of rest. Brant clutched the braided charm in his hand, knowing Matt would scoff at his dream, but spoke anyway. "You're gonna think I'm crazy, but I ain't. Leastwise, I don't think I'm crazy, though maybe I am. You got to promise you ain't gonna laugh." "Oh, hell, can a man sleep 5 more minutes?" "You laugh and I'm gonna kick your ass, and I ain't drunk right now, so you can bet I can do it." "Hunter, just tell me." "I saw it in a dream." "What? Saw what?" "I saw what happened to that Johnson feller." "A dream? What the hell?" "Like I say, I have an idea where we can find Cecil Johnson." "Pray tell." "You promised you weren't gonna laugh." "I ain't laughing." "You can't even smile." "You didn't say anything about smiling. What happened in your dream?" "Well, it wasn't a dream exactly." "What was it?" "More like a vision." "A vision?" "Nakona showed it to me. See, I got this other spirit that looks like a mountain lion. This sounds like pure bullshit, huh? Never mind." Brant stretched, uncertain now. Matt, however, seemed interested. "So a mountain lion comes to you in a vision or dream of some sort. What did he say?" "Well, it said..." Brant stopped short for a moment as the morning sun appeared suddenly hard and bright through the tent flaps. "Brantley, you were saying..." Hunter didn't speak for a moment, sorting things in his mind. Had Nakona come to him? Had he been running alongside the old Indian chief, or had they been one and the same, one animal running across space and time? "I ain't sure the mountain lion came to me or was me. It was... shit, I don't know." "What was that? You were the lion?" "Come on, Hunter, let's get this stuff packed up and get back on the trail." Brant followed his partner, crawling from the tent, rolling his head to loosen the crick in his neck. "Which trail were you thinking of following?" Brant asked. "Well, back to Kansas, unless you have something else in mind. Which trail do you suggest? Which way did that mountain lion point?" Brant realized his story sounded ridiculous. Even so, another instinct told them that they should ride east, back along the trail into Oklahoma. Despite the receding memory of his dream, one detail remained clear. He had seen a hill, and near a stand of brush, Cecil Johnson hid beneath a stand of junipers, waiting there, though Brant couldn't be sure why or for what reason. Was Johnson hiding or waiting for someone to pass? "So, back to Abilene, then?" Matt asked. "No, sir," Brant said. "We ain't done yet." "Hunter, I'm doing the best I can. I know I've not always been. Matt looked defeated. I promise I won't laugh at whatever you have to say. Brant paused once more, then nodded and spoke. In my dream, or whatever it was, Johnson sold most of his herd somewhere west of here. The location wasn't clear and that part is vague, but after he sold his mules, except for breeding stock, he left his children with an old man, gave them a good-sized sack of gold, and rode east alone. Johnson has a score to settle, one he can't leave be. He traveled east, Matt, back toward his home. Doesn't make a bit of sense, but I saw a place. The place where we'll find Johnson. A green valley and a stand of juniper. But it felt like home, if it was Johnson's home. Doesn't make a bit of sense, but I think he's headed for Indian Territory. I know it sounds crazy, but we haven't been there, right? It does seem like we should at least look at the scene of the crime. Matt stared at Brent for a long moment, amazed by the eloquent flow of words springing from his usually silent partner. Maybe it was Brent's sense of conviction or his own lack of direction. Whatever the case, Matt felt Brent might be right. You seem fairly sure about this one, Hunter. I'd say that's overstating things. I ain't sure at all. It's purely a gut feeling. Matt glanced at the horizon, the glowing eastern skyline, the ghostly fog that rose like a veil. From the bluff where they camped, a line of light crawled across the eastern prairie. Matt suddenly felt a twinge of annoyance with himself. Something had occurred to him, something he had missed, something Cottonmouth had said back at the fort. The bearded blacksmith had said they had no right to find any of them, not a single one. Why had Cottonmouth used those words? Not a single one. Unless... Sometimes you have to trust your gut, Hunter, Matt said. They did split up, or plan to, and Cottonmouth knew it. What's that? When we talked to Cottonmouth, he said we had no right to find them, none of them. He told us about how they came through the fort, which we suspected already. He also mentioned that some of Johnson's family members were missing, something we also suspected. Then he said something else, and it didn't register with me at the time, but now, maybe. Cottonmouth said we had no godly right to find the Johnson family, none of them. Why would he say none of them if they weren't planning to split up? Or maybe they already had split up. That would put Johnson a week or maybe 10 days ahead of us. They split up. The family split up because Johnson wanted something, revenge for his wife's death, or something he left undone. Brent, I don't know how, but you're right. We need to go back, head into the territories, and figure out exactly what happened at that ranch. As they finished packing, Brent felt gratified by Matt's decision. He enjoyed feeling like he had something more than a fast gun to contribute. Matt, on the other hand, had decided there might be some usefulness to Brant's newly found instincts and asked several questions about the dream, making notes as Brant recalled the details. Matt also cursed his own stupidity. Cottonmouth had totally fooled them. He made his living reading others, recognizing a lie, examining motives, knowing how and why someone might say one thing instead of another. Had Cottonmouth said something else? Had he betrayed some other vital bit of information with a glance, a subtle laugh, or even a gesture? Why had the man been so hospitable, serving them cookies, welcoming them into his house, treating them with such deference? Matt had plenty to think about. Then he recalled something else, something one of the Baylor brothers had said. Matt suddenly knew not only where Cecil Johnson might be going, but also who he might be looking for.